Time Warner Audiobooks presents A Kind of Grace, the autobiography of the world's greatest female athlete, written by Jackie Joyner Kersee with Sonia Steptoe. Read by Jackie Joyner Kersee.
I don't think of being an athlete as unfeminine. I think of it as a kind of grace. A sense of nervous anticipation was building in the moist and muggy Atlanta air that late July morning. It was an hour before the heptathlon competition at the 1996 Olympic Games, and the serious business of preparing for combat was well underway on the warm-up track. Coaches reviewed strategy on the sidelines while their athletes limber up on the infield. Around them, competitors of every race, nationality, and shoe company affiliation paraded around the jogging track as television crews from NBC and CNN moved into position, angling for pictures and sound bites. Sprinkled among the group were my opponents, the world's most versatile and gifted female athletes. Every 4 years, such a group gathered at the Olympic venue to contest the heptathlon, a 2-day 7-part trial of endurance and skill. To claim victory, a woman must outperform her competitors in negotiating 100 meters of track and hurdles, clearing the high jump bar, throwing the javelin, sprinting 200 meters, leaping into the long jump pit, putting the shot, and running the 800 meters. Her reward at the finish of the grueling ordeal is an Olympic gold medal and the title, the world's greatest female athlete. Between 1984 and the beginning of 1996, I won every single heptathlon I completed, posting the 6 highest scores in the sport's history, setting 4 world records, winning 2 world championships, and capturing 2 Olympic gold medals along the way. Impressive as my record was, I didn't feel the least bit invincible that morning in Atlanta. Laying on my stomach across the white bath towel on the infield grass, I thought only of my ailing right hamstring. The fingers of my physical therapist, Bob Forster, fiercely massaged the knot of the hamstring muscle and scar tissue still tender from the severe pull I suffered 3 weeks earlier. The gold medal and the world record were far from my mind. Given the precarious condition of my leg, my goal was simply to survive the 4 events on the day's schedule. My elaborate plans for the final Olympic heptathlon triumph were slowly unraveling. I've chosen this occasion as the perfect opportunity for a swan song. I made my Olympic debut at Los Angeles Games in 1984. Now, after achieving so much on foreign soil, a world record in Moscow, gold medals in Seoul and Barcelona, world championship in Rome and Stuttgart, I wanted to close out my participation in this event in my homeland, with the eyes of the world watching. There were still a few springs left in my leg for long jumping, my other specialty, but my days as a heptathlete were numbered. I still held the heptathlon world record at 72.91 points, but the rigorous training and the arduous competition were taking a toll on my body, chipping away my muscle mass and draining my energy. My chronic asthma condition was affecting me more and more on the track. I'd come close to dying off the track. I wanted to spend my final moment as a heptathlete on the medal stand, not on an ambulance stretcher. I was drained emotionally, too. Dominance I learned over the years, bringing both adulation and attack. No sooner had the greatest female athlete crown been placed on my head in 1988 than the efforts to knock it off began. I faced unfounded accusation of steroid use, heard unkind remarks about my appearance, and read hypercritical reviews of my performances. I tried to endure it all with a good cheer, but in truth, the comments hurt me very deeply. If, as the critics kept saying, I was only as good as my last heptathlon performance, I wanted the final one in Atlanta to be my best of all. Things started going wrong in June at the Olympic trials. I sprained an ankle, pulled my right hamstring, and battled a cold and an asthma attack during the meet and lost by 3 points to Kelly Blair, who performed great as I struggled. It was my first defeat in 12 years. Then, just 21 days before the Olympics, The scar tissue knotted around my right hamstring jerked away from the muscle while I was airborne over a hurdle. When the pain registered, I jumped and fell to the track, screaming in agony and rage. My leg had been obstinate since then. Each time I tried to blast out of the starting blocks or push across the shot put ring in practice, the pain was awful. I had not been able to test the leg strength to employ it as I would have to in competition. Now, with the moment at hand, I wince and I wonder, was my hamstring strong enough for the task ahead? How would it respond when I call on it to help me get over 100 meters of track and hurdles, to clear the high jump bar, to provide the power to throw the shot put, and after all that, run the 200 meters at world-class speed? As I walked into the packed Olympic Stadium, the sky turned gloomy. Raindrops dotted my legs and arms as we lined up in front of the blocks for the hurdle race. The drops became sprinkles and turned quickly into sheets of showers. The starter called us to the blocks. Staring down my lane at the line of hurdles, I focused on starting strong and moving steadily forward, one step at a time. I shot out the blocks without pain. A good sign. I was in front heading into the series of hurdles. First, second, third, fourth. All cleared. So far, so good. Fifth, sixth. Then, oh my God. The hamstring pulled as I stepped over the seventh. Keep going, girl, I told myself. Don't stop. It hurts, but there's only 3 left. I gathered all my strength and tackled the 8th. My cheeks puffing fiercely, I gritted my teeth to cushion the pain as I landed. I pushed on to the 9th. Another deep breath. The jump, the wince, the exhale. One more. I gritted my teeth and I cleared it. Then a grimace at the finish line. I made it. Not only was I still in competition, I won the heat. Now get some help for that throbbing leg. Dripping wet, I grabbed my gear and hobbled toward my husband and coach, Bob Kersee. I was panting and in terrible pain, but I stopped on the way for a brief interview in the downpour with Chris Collinsworth of NBC, who held an umbrella over us. Between gasps, I told him, I want to stay positive, take it one event at a time, and let my physical therapist get in there and dig out what's ever in that muscle. We went to the coach's room, hoping to use one of the massage tables, but they wouldn't allow Bobby inside, even though he was my coach, because he didn't have the proper credentials. So the 3 of us, Bobby, Bob the therapist, and I, climbed a flight of stairs inside the stadium to the concession area, where we found a little-used handicap access ramp. I threw down the towel and stretched out on my stomach. Bobby and Bob went to work with ice packs and massaging hands to quiet the spasm inside my hamstring. Spectators watching us from their seats applauded and shouted encouragement. We love you, Jackie. You're the best. Good luck. The spasm eventually subsided. After an hour-and-a-half rain delay, the heptathletes were moving to the high jump apron. The nice people who watched my therapy session cheered as I made my way down the field. I took a practice jump at a very low height and knocked the bar down. I knew I was in trouble. I walked across the track to the stadium railing where Bobby was standing. It feels like it's pulling, I said. If I accelerate, I don't know what will happen. I'll try the next height and see. I turned and I walked away. As I crossed the track and reached the high jump apron, I heard Bobby's voice over my shoulder. He jumped over the railing and was walking up behind me. That's it, Jackie, he shouted. I'm not going to let you do this. No, Bobby, I want to try. Let me at least try. He led me to the tent where the heptathletes had gathered. We sat on the bench. He looked at me and said, I watched you for 12 years give everything you got. I'm no longer going to allow you to do this. It's time to go. Bobby, I just want to try. No, Jackie. This isn't a coach-athlete thing. This is your husband telling you it's time for you to go. It was over. I sat there a good 3 to 5 minutes, absorbing the impact, while Bobby told the officials I was withdrawing. I tried to hold back the tears, but they poured out of my eyes, down my cheeks. Bobby started crying too. I leaned against him and put my head on his shoulder. He put his arm around me. We sobbed together. Gada Shoa, a Syrian heptathlete, came over and hugged me. Then she kissed me on both cheeks. She also kissed Bobby. That was the greatest compliment a competitor could have paid me. Sabina Braun of Germany came over and patted me on the back. It was a touching gesture, considering our tense rivalry. I gathered my paraphernalia and walked off the track with Bobby. None of the spectators knew what was happening, so there was no reaction. We walked past a wall of reporters. I was too emotional to talk. If I had tried to open my mouth and speak, I would have burst into tears. Bobby, and I walked back to the hotel, just a few blocks from the stadium, in silence. With the track and field events underway, the streets around the stadium were deserted and deadly quiet. It was like being in a funeral procession, a funeral for my dead dreams. Within minutes, our hotel room filled with our friends. My high school track coach, Nino Fenoy, my Aunt Della, my brother Al, and sister-in-law Florence, and many others. As each visitor came in and saw me, there was a new round of hugs, kisses, and tears. What began as the worst of days was ending as the best. The phone rang nonstop once the word got out that I had withdrawn. Reporters wanted to interview us. I still couldn't talk about what had happened. Bobby agreed to go to the broadcast center for an interview with NBC's Dwight Stones. During the telecast, Tom Hammond and Dwight discussed my career, tracing the ups and downs. Their reports showed scenes of Bobby yelling at me and comforting me, and replayed moments from my injuries and my victories. Tom and Dwight said such wonderful things. For the first time in my career, I felt appreciated and respected for my accomplishments. She is clearly the greatest female athlete of her day, Tom said. If judged by her heart, then surely the greatest of all time. Tears came to my eyes. Jackie Joyner Kersee is very, very important to track and field, Dwight said in conclusion. There is no argument that she's the greatest female athlete of all time. Most people never get to hear such tributes because they're bestowed after they died. I felt so privileged to hear them now. Bobby returned to the hotel room just in time for a call from Bill Cosby, our friend and trusted advisor for many years. Bill teased me about the fight he figured Bobby and I were having about the decision to withdraw. It made me laugh. I know you and Bobby are going to get into it, he said, but why don't you listen to your husband one time? Then he talked to Bobby and kidded with him. Try not to be so evil to your wife, man. Flowers arrived throughout the day. One vase from Aretha Franklin, another from Arsenio Hall. Lionel Richie also sent a bouquet. Late that night, we received a message that President Clinton was trying to reach us. He left a number to the retreat at Camp David, Maryland. I was dumbfounded to think that the president would take the time to call me and offer his support. I hadn't won anything. Bobby called the number right away after reading the note. It was about 11 p.m. We worried that it was too late, but the president told us to call, so we did. When Bobby handed me the receiver and I heard President Clinton say, "Hi, Jackie," I was speechless. He told me I had done a lot to inspire the youth of the nation. Of all the nice things he said during the conversation, that compliment made me the proudest. The question on everyone's mind after my withdrawal was whether I had a realistic chance of making it back to the track for the long jump. I had 4.5 days to rest, but the hurdle race had further weakened the muscle. It could rip the very next time I tried to run hard. That would surely end my athletic career and possibly maim me for life. But in my mind, the decision came down to this. I couldn't let that tearful withdrawal stand as my final Olympic act. At the appointed hour, I would show up at the long jump pit and hope and pray I could respond one last time. The night in October 1960, when Alfred Joyner and Mary Ruth Gaines eloped, they told their grandmother they were going on a date. 10 months earlier in January of that year, Mary had given birth to a baby boy, Alfrederick. Mary's grandmother, Lena Rainey, didn't approve of the teenager's pregnancy, but she allowed Mary and her baby to continue living with her. Mary didn't dare tell her about the marriage. She was just 16, and her groom was only 14. After taking their vows, Mommy and Daddy went back to their separate homes. 2 years later, my mother was pregnant again. When my grandmother found out, she hit the roof. And when she discovered that Alfred was also her grandson-in-law, she tried to hit my father. She chased him out of the house and all the way down the street. Then she stormed back into her house and kicked my mother and her baby son out. 3 months later, on March 3rd, 1962, I was born. My sister Angela was born 11 months after me, in February 1963. Deborah arrived the following year in June. While Mama stayed home with the babies, Daddy finished high school and found a job after graduation. They were kids raising kids. 6 of us lived with my great-grandmother, Ollie Mae, in her small 6-room wood-frame house on Piggott Avenue. The house had one tiny bathroom. The entire 1-block radius around our house was a magnet for assorted winos, pimps, gangsters, ex-cons, and hustlers. But we always said hello to the men who called the spot headquarters. My father had grown up with some of them and had drinks with them after work at the bar across the street from our house. They seemed like neighbors. Because my parents were so very young and weren't well educated when they married, the odds were against us from the start. Our lives were an almost constant struggle. It was remarkable that my mama and daddy were able to provide for all of us and hold our family together. When I was very young, our lives were happy and mostly calm. The whole family ate dinner together, with my father at the head of the table, my mother at the other end, and the 2 kids on each side. No one raised a fork until we bowed our heads and said grace. Even when there wasn't a lot to eat, our meals were always tasty. Daddy had an extra helping of neck bones each time Mama served them. On Fridays, we looked forward to fried fish and spaghetti. Despite the shortage and problems, my parents never allowed us to think of ourselves as disadvantaged or as victims. While they wanted us to strive for more, they also taught us to be grateful for what we had. I was jealous while walking home at the end of the day spent with my friends who live in the housing projects. Our house was several blocks from the village of the high and low-rise apartment buildings. I felt isolated, living so far away from my playmates. One day I walked into my house and said to my mother, "I wish we could live in the projects." Mama stopped what she was doing, whipped around and looked at me as if I cursed. "Jackie, you have lost your mind," she said. Her voice became more passionate. "You should be glad you have a house to live in. People live in projects because they don't have anywhere else to stay." My parents did their best to keep us out of harm's way. My mother outlined a code of conduct and strictly enforced it to try and protect us. She was determined to put us on a path to a better life by teaching us to be disciplined, hardworking, and responsible. The complete list of her rules will fill this book, but here's a sampling. No gifts from strangers. No playing too far from the front yard. No playing outside after dark. No playing outside until your household chores are done. No playing at all if your report card has D's or F's. No makeup. No long phone conversations. No boyfriends until age 16. No dates past 10 p.m. We didn't have a closet full of clothes. Each of us had 1 or 2 outfits and a pair of shoes for church and special occasion. The few pieces composing our school wardrobes, along with a pair of shoes, we received at the beginning of the term and had to last the entire year. We never received birthday presents or had parties, but at Christmas, my parents made up for the absence of luxuries by giving us everything on our Christmas gift list. No matter what sacrifices had to be made, by the time the gift wrap was ripped and the boxes were open, the living room was awash in bicycles, musical instruments, walkie-talkies, train sets, electric football games, board games, easy-bake ovens, stacks of new clothes, and Barbie dolls. My brother Al got away with murder when we were growing up. He made a small fortune from his shoe shining job. He never saved a dime of it, spending it all on wacky gadget advertised in the back of comic books. Neither of my parents said a word about it. But when I took a summer job at a movie theater in downtown St. Louis, Mom insisted that I forked over half of every check to her, and that I deposit a big chunk of the other half in a savings account. She said I had to learn financial responsibility. When I complained about the double standard, she replied, "Boys can take care of themselves." Better than anyone, my parents knew what a pitfall teen pregnancy could be for young black people. They drilled it into my head that they didn't want me to repeat their mistake, and they did everything in their power to see that I didn't. As a result, I was never in serious danger of becoming pregnant in high school. When I turned 16, I fell for a boy on the basketball team who was 2 years older than me and was in the same homeroom as Al. My brother reassured my parents that he was a nice guy and a good athlete, which also helped my father warm to the idea. I liked him because we shared a common interest in athletics. My mother grew to like him because he was courteous and obeyed her rule that I be home by 10 p.m. after our dates. She called him a gentleman. But as his graduation approached in the spring, the guy wanted to start a sexual relationship, which I promptly reported to my mama. "No, no, no," she said, vigorously shaking her head. "We're not making any babies in this house. If he wants sex, he can get it from someone else. You have too much to do in life. You don't have time to bring any babies into this world now." I was head over heels for this guy. Still, I wasn't ready for anything serious. He said he wanted to date other girls. Several months later, I heard that the girl he was seeing was pregnant. That night, I sat in my bedroom and I cried. Mama came into my room and sat beside me. I told her what happened as she wiped away my tears. "I know it hurts now," she said in a soft voice, "but the pain will go away and you'll see that you have made the right decision." During the 1960s, East St. Louis was a prosperous place, an all-American city with low unemployment and a bustling economy. We had a Sears store, big grocery stores, a big Woolworth stores, banks, several hospitals, and a clutch of locally owned businesses. To the strain of Burn Baby Burn, the city was rocked by black militant protests, vandalism and arson during the late 1960s. White residents fled the city for outland suburbs. With their customer base shrinking and their assets threatened, local businesses closed eventually. Sears left too. The manufacturing companies with operation in town followed. The move threw people in my neighborhood out of work in droves. By the mid-1970s, East St. Louis economy was nosediving. Between 1974 and 1975, the already high unemployment rate skyrocketed from 12% to 17%. As unemployment rose, crime exploded. Pretty soon, parts of East St. Louis looked like shelled-out war zones, and the city suffered from a terrible national reputation. For many years, Daddy made a good living as an airplane assembly line worker at McDonnell Douglas. After he was laid off by the aircraft company, he did manual labor at a manufacturing company. He held on for a while, but finally the axe fell on him. He was out of work for a long time, doing odd jobs like mowing lawns, before he was hired as a switch operator by the railroad company in Springfield. Eventually, my mother found a job to help make ends meet. The morning before she left for her first day as a nurse assistant at St. Mary's Hospital, she gathered Al, Deborah, Angie, and me around her to explain why she had to leave us on our own. Dressed in her pale blue uniform, white stockings, and white shoes, she looked each of us in the eye as she spoke. "I'm not going to be here to help you get ready for school, to make sure you do your homework, and to cook your supper every night, because I have to go to work now," she said. "I hope you understand. It doesn't mean I don't care about you anymore." When my father found the railroad job in Springfield 100 miles away, he rented a room and lived there during the week, returning home on the weekends. Before Daddy left for Springfield that first time, he talked to us the same way my mom had the morning she started working at St. Mary's. "I'm not abandoning you," he said. "So while I'm gone, don't give your mama a hard time, because I'll be back every weekend and I'll get a full report." It would have been easy for my parents to lose hope and give in to temptations, the way so many other people did in East St. Louis. But they never became dejected or hopeless. They never blamed anyone for their predicament. They never considered doing anything illegal. No matter how hard the times were, they kept plugging away, working hard, and doing the best they could with the limited resources. The beliefs they held and the example they set counteracted the negative forces at work on the streets of our neighborhood. Their unwavering commitment to work ethic and their sound values formed my life from childhood into adulthood. The dump trucks, cement mixers, bulldozers carrying hard-headed workmen rolled through our neighborhood early one summer morning in the late 1960s. They clustered at the corner of 15th and Pickett and began digging at the entrance to Lincoln Park. When the construction crew began pouring the foundation and assembling the skeleton of a big building, we began speculating on the project's purpose. Occasionally, a group of us ventured over to the site and stood with our faces pressed to the fence, watching the construction crew's every move and jabbering away. Once the cinder block exterior was completed, the crew put the finishing touches on the interior. Before the complex was opened in 1969, a security guard kept watch outside to deter the local vandals. Weary of our persistent questions about what was inside, he let us in one day for a sneak peek. It was more fantastic than anything I imagined. It was big, beautiful, air-conditioned, and best of all, free of charge. It smelled of new wood, fresh paint, and varnish. The guard said they were going to name it the Mary E. Brown Community Center, after a woman I never heard of who had made contributions to the community. All the kids from the neighborhood spent time at the center, but I practically lived there. The center revealed a whole new world to me, teaching me things I wouldn't have learned otherwise. Every day at story time, I sat on the floor and listened to an adult read the story of Black Beauty or Rapunzel. I made black ashtrays and green planters in ceramic class and cotton candy-colored styrofoam wastebaskets from egg cartons in craft class. Much of my handiwork became Christmas and birthday presents for my mom. I signed up for modern dance class. I was always tripping or stumbling over something. I thought dance lesson would improve my coordination. The dance classes turned out to be one of the most enriching experiences of my childhood. Our teacher, Mr. Wilson, was a devotee of the Catherine Dunham technique. Miss Dunham is an internationally renowned dance and choreographer whose style incorporates elements of African and Caribbean folk cultures. She was one of the first African Americans to have a professional touring dance company. Alvin Ailey and Debbie Allen studied her technique. Miss Dunham and Josephine Baker were famous, successful women who were from our hometown. I read about how they performed all over the world and lived glamorously. Josephine Baker resided in Paris, but Miss Dunham continued to live in East St. Louis, which gave me a sense of pride. When she was in town, she came to our Saturday classes and talked to us about dancing and self-expression. She was an exotic, elegant woman. Her voice was soft, her diction was perfect. I sat cross-legged on the floor in my leotard, looking up at her, mesmerized and hanging on every breath she took. Miss Dunham was my first truly accessible role model, a woman I was able to admire up close and in person. She still lives in East St. Louis, and over the years, she and I have become close friends. She writes to me from time to time when she's traveling, and I visit her when I come home. The Dunham method influenced not just how I danced, but how I carried myself. Mr. Wilson said the Dunham dancers had a distinct elegance. They don't walk, they glide, he explained. To be a true Dunham dancer, you must point your toes, hold your heads up and stomachs in. Unlike the bus stop, the hustle, and the other dances we did to the music on the radio, the more classical dance movement Mr. Wilson taught us came easily to me. You have the talent, he told me after class one day. Your legs are long and powerful. That's what a good dancer needs. His words made my heart leap. No one had ever complimented me for having long legs. With Daddy and Al constantly teasing me about being tall and skinny, I had become self-conscious about my height. But Mr. Wilson made me feel proud of my body. I now thought of my long legs as an asset, a powerful asset. Although dancing was just a hobby to me, I probably would have continued taking lessons if Mr. Wilson hadn't died. He was shot to death, allegedly during an argument over drugs. After the incident, the classes stopped, and so did my interest in dance. To find out this man, whom I associated so strongly with dancing as an ambition, might have been involved in drugs, turned me off to the sport. Without dancing, I was adrift. I wandered around the community center for weeks, looking for something that sparked my interest, something I could excel in. While I searched, I diverted a portion of my considerable energy to cheerleading for the boys' basketball and football teams. I was captain of the squad, which also included my sister Deborah and Angie, my neighbor Kim Cole, and a few other girls. As a cheerleader, I was a real jumping Jackie, if you're pardon the pun. The dance exercise, knee bends, squats, and stretches. My legs were strong. My favorite stunt was to jump up in the air into a spread eagle, touch my toes, and land on the ground in a split, while the other girls did a less daring jump and slid into a split. The people in the bleachers cheered and applauded every time we did it. One day, in 1972, when I was 10, a sign-up sheet for girls' track appeared on the bulletin board at the community center. If my legs were strong enough for dancing and jumping, maybe I could run fast too, I thought to myself. I printed my name on the first line. A bunch of girls, including my sisters, Deborah, Angie, and me, showed up for the track team on a sunny afternoon in late May. We were dressed in T-shirts and shorts, and we squinted and cupped our hands over our eyes to shield them from the sun as we looked up at our coach, Percy Harris. He explained that practice would be held every afternoon and that we had to run around the center track behind the center to prepare for our races. He pointed to the circular track, which still exists at the back of Lincoln Park and became a fixture of my teenage years. It measured about 550 yards around, roughly a third of a mile. A standard track is oval-shaped and measures about 400 meters, a quarter mile. Those of us who completed the lap were panting hard by the time we reached the end. We bent over and put our hands on our knees when we finished. The other girls had stopped running and were walking. Percy said we had to run around 2 more times without stopping to get a mile workout. Some of the girls mumbled and rolled their eyes. I took off around the track. Each day, fewer and fewer girls showed up until finally the track team consists of 3 Joyner girls, 2 of whom were there under protest. At that point, Percy gave up the idea of forming a team, but I wanted to continue running, so he introduced me to George Ward, who coached a half-dozen girls at Franklin Elementary and brought them to Lincoln Park in the summer to practice. The first race I ran for Mr. Ward was a 400-meter contest. He lined us up opposite 2 bent steel poles. Then, stopwatch in hand, he walked around to the other side of the circle and stood on the board that marked the end of the 400 meters. From there, he yelled, "On your mark, get set, go." The rest of the girls charged ahead. I ran as hard as I could, but I couldn't catch them. I finished last. I couldn't believe how fast the others were. "What can I do to get faster?" I asked Mr. Ward. "Just keep coming to practice. You'll get better," he assured me. I finished last, or nearly last, in every race that summer, but Mr. Ward stuck with me. When school resumed, he picked me up every afternoon at home and drove me to track practice at his school. I looked forward to it all day. After several more races and no ribbons, however, I became discouraged. "Am I ever going to win anything?" I asked. He gave me a consoling pat on the back as we walked to his car. "You will if you keep working hard." I wasn't crazy about running the 400 meters, which was called the 440-yard dash at that time. My real love was jumping, but I was too shy to tell Mr. Ward. For weeks, I watched Gwen Brown run down a long jump track and leap into the air like a plane taking off. I bit my lower lip as she practiced, yearning for just one chance to run down the dirt path and jump into the shallow sand. When I returned home that afternoon, I got a brainstorm. I found potato chip bags and convinced my sisters to go over to the sandbox in the park, fill the bags, and help me bring the sand back to our house. Over the next several afternoons, we secretly carried sand from the park to the front yard. where I made a small sand pit. On the days when I didn't go to practice, I hopped onto the porch railing, which was about 3 feet high, crouched down with my back arched, and leaped into the sand. The feeling was so satisfying and so much fun, I did it over and over again for about an hour. One afternoon, after all the other girls had left practice, while I waited for Mr. Ward to drive me home, I walked over to the runway. It was nothing more than a long strip of grass, marked off with a strip of tape at one end, and a shallow hole with a thin layer of sand at the other end. I was tired after running sprints and conditioning drills, but standing there, looking down the long jump lane for the first time, I was energized. I mimicked what I had seen Gwen doing. I charged down the lane as fast as I could. I kicked my legs out in front of me and pushed myself forward. What a feeling! It was like flying. I stood up, content with myself and feeling daring. I smiled as I dusted the sand off my shorts and legs. Mr. Ward ran towards me. I was afraid he was going to be mad, but there was an excited look in his eyes. "Do that again," he shouted. I trotted back to the starting line and repeated the process. Charge, plant, push, kick, fly. His mouth dropped. "I didn't know you could jump," Mr. Ward said. "Oh, I love to jump," I said. "My legs are strong from cheerleading. I have wanted to try jumping for the longest time." "Starting tomorrow, come to the long jump pit, and I'll work with you and Gwen together," he said. Mr. Ward was volunteering his time to the after-school track program. In coaching young girls, he and Nino Fennoy, a teacher at Lily Freeman Elementary, who had organized a girl squad at the school, were exploring new territory, exposing themselves to criticism. No one in town had ever tried cultivating athletic interest among girls, while boys had high school and junior high teams. Girls in our community had no organized sports activities whatsoever. Congress had recently passed Title IX, the federal legislation requiring public schools to give girls and boys equal opportunities to participate in athletics. Mr. Ward used the new law to develop opportunities for girls in sports. The combined Franklin Freeman Elementary School team competed against other schools during the academic year. A year later, when I was 12, the two men organized a track squad of male and female athletes from all the schools in town that competed in summer amateur athletic union track meets. The squad was called the East St. Louis Railers. Although I didn't realize it at the time, my participation on the Railer squad set me on course that would lead me far beyond Pickett Avenue, into a world full of life experiences both painful and joyous. People have always assumed I succeeded at sports because I was a natural talent. Not quite. I had talent and determination, but I needed someone to help me develop it. Nino Fennoy was that person. I met Mr. Fennoy on a spring day in 1973. Mr. Ward piled the girls he'd been coaching into his car and drove us to the field at Hughes Quinn Junior High, some 8 blocks from my house. Every evening, Mr. Fennoy worked with a group of boys and girls from Lily Freeman Elementary at the Hughes Quinn playground. The two men had decided to divide the coaching duties of the Franklin Freeman squad, with Mr. Ward taking the boys and Mr. Fennoy the girls. Mr. Fennoy was a high school classmate of my daddy's. He studied physical education in college and earned a master's degree from Southern Illinois University. He got the idea of using sports to help the young people in East St. Louis after administering the presidential physical fitness test to a group of Lily Freeman students early in the school year. When they scored in the top percentile, without any preparation or coaching, he knew he found the seeds of a potential fruitful program. He spoke like a wise old man, a combination of sociologist, philosopher, and motivational speaker, with his index finger jabbing the air and his hazel eyes staring intently at us. He peppered his speeches at the team meetings with phrases like making the maximum use of minimal resources and the parameters of acceptable behavior. He encouraged us to work hard at practice, as well as in class. With a solid foundation in athletics and academics, he told us the possibilities were unlimited. College scholarships, graduate school, well-paying jobs, and productive lives. In one of his first speeches to us after practice, when we were still in elementary school, he explained that success in sports could open doors for us and set us on the path to broader success. Doing well in sports is fine, but in order to compete and get any portion of what this country has to offer, you have to have an education. You can't get a job if you can't fill out an application. Like my parents, he stressed that there was a world beyond East St. Louis, and that life in that world wouldn't be a struggle if we were properly prepared. You have alternatives, he said. You don't have to just be housewives. You don't have to settle for staying here. Other than my parents, Mr. Fanoy was the major influence on my attitude and outlook. He inspired me to make the most of my talent, to withstand peer pressure, and to avoid the traps into which others fell. As protective as my parents were, they allowed me to go to out-of-town meets with Mr. Fanoy because they knew I was in good hands. He was like a father away from home. On one of the first trips I took with the Railers, I didn't have any money for lunch. My father wasn't working. My mother said she just didn't have anything to give me. If I went, she said I had to wait until I got back home that night to eat. When the van carrying us pulled into the McDonald's parking lot at lunchtime, my mouth watered and my stomach growled. I exerted myself all morning and I was starving. But when it was time to get off the bus, I was too embarrassed to say I didn't have any money, so I told everyone I wasn't hungry. While my teammates rushed inside with bills clutched in their hands, I waited on the bus. No sense of torturing myself by going inside and smelling the French fries. Mr. Fanoy walked back to the bus and asked why I wasn't inside. I told him I wasn't hungry. Without inquiring further, he said, "Come on inside with me and order what you want." "Thanks," I said, flashing a big grateful grin. With Mr. Fanoy, I got a taste of life away from East St. Louis. It was at times a bittersweet experience. In most cases, the only way white schools would agree to compete against us was if we traveled to their schools. East St. Louis had such a bad reputation. People were afraid to come into town. One white coach told Mr. Fanoy he was afraid his bus would be vandalized. It made me sad to hear what people thought of the place I lived. During the preliminary round of the AAU meet in Poplar Bluff, Missouri in 1976, when I was 14, I landed a jump in my last turn during the qualifying round, which should have been long enough to put me in the final round. But the officials failed to record it. As a result, I was out of the competition. At the time, I thought it was a deliberate oversight. The disappointment was all the more bruising because I had to finish in one of the top 3 spots to advance to the AAU regional competition and to have a chance at competing at the AAU national meet. When the officials told me I failed to qualify, tears welled up in my eyes and my body stiffened. I was ready to yell at someone. Mr. Fanoy saw my face and called me over. "It's not fair," I started to rant. "Don't say another word," he ordered, pointing his finger at me. "Let me handle it, and you better not cry either." He didn't make a scene. He huddled with the officials, discussing the issue calmly. Then he walked back over to me and told me the decision was final. I wanted to scream about the injustice of it all. While he was gone, I had overheard some of the chaperones saying that Miss Fanoy had run into trouble with one of the judges at a meet in the past. The conversation made it sound like it was a racial issue. When I asked him about it, he said whether the oversight was racially motivated or not wasn't the point. Rather than looking for someone to blame or to be mad with, let's learn from this, he said. The idea of blame and anger appeals to me more, but I listen. From now on, after every jump, always make sure that the judges have recorded your mark. And let's work hard on jumping so the next time one jump won't mean the difference between qualifying and not qualifying. The lesson stuck with me. Watching Mr. Fanoy, I learned to handle controversy and adversity calmly. And at each long jump competition I enter, I walk by the judges after every jump. And while pretending to look at the standings, I make sure they recorded the results. I began competing in the Pentathlon at the age 14. It wasn't something that was part of any grand plan. It was an afterthought. Miss Fanoy had me competing in a slew of individual events and said I might as well compete in one event that put them all together. The Pentathlon consists of 5 events: the 100-meter hurdles, the high jump, the long jump, the shot put, and the 800 meters. I could handle the long jump, the shot put, and 800 meters, and even though my hurdling was ragged, I knew I could run fast, so I ran fast and jumped over them. It wasn't the proper technique, but it worked. I also didn't know if I could high jump, but I knew I could jump high. After 3-step run up to the bar, I would plant my left foot, take a big jump, and while keeping my legs bent and my head up almost like a baby in a fetal position, hurl myself over the bar. Athletes in the multi-events compile points based on the result of each event. The points are awarded based on how the athlete performs in each event compared to an arbitrary standard established by the judges. The competitors with the highest total score after the last event wins. I didn't know exactly what the running and jumping I was doing on the track could lead to until I watched Bruce Jenner win a gold medal in the decathlon at the 1976 Olympic Games in Montreal. His performance was inspiring. After watching the Montreal Games on TV, I could relate my training with Mr. Fenoy at Lincoln Park to something bigger and better. I realized that athletics might take me somewhere. They're doing the same thing I do, I told Al while sitting on the porch one day after the Olympics ended. I'm going to try for the Olympic team. I want to be on TV. I announced my plans to Mr. Fenoy after our next practice. You think I can get to the real Olympics? I asked. Let's try and see, he said. My training in the individual events during the school year helped my performance in the pentathlon. Right off the bat, the results were encouraging. A year after I first tried the pentathlon, I qualified for the AAU Junior Olympics. My regular teammate, Deborah Thurston, also was a pentathlete. By the summer of 1977, when I was 15, we both were among the best in the nation, on our way to the AAU Junior Olympics. The meet was held in Yakima, Washington, about as far from East St. Louis as you can get and still be in the continental United States. To raise $5,000 for the trip, we held stock house, bake sales, car wash, and went door to door soliciting contributions. We raised enough money to go to Yakima, and Mr. Fenoy had to attend another meet, so Coach Orlando Hampton went with us. At the St. Louis airport, we met Bill Cosby. We told him it was our first time flying, and he just laughed. It was unreal. He talked to us for a long time. He was so nice to spend so much time with us. 7 years later, after the 1984 Olympics, I met him again, and to my surprise, he remembered that airport meeting. We've been good friends ever since. Thurston was good in the high jump and the 800 meters, but I was faster and a better long jumper. I usually built up a lot of points in the long jump and the 100-meter hurdles, and was far ahead by the time we got to the 800, the last event and her best. So in the past, I had never really had to run hard in the 800. But in Yakima, I didn't hurdle well, and my high jump was off. So although I beat her in the long jump, we were close in points. But because we ran hurdles and threw the shot about the same distance, it came down to the 800 meters, the event I dreaded. It was 2 laps around the track at a pretty fast pace, and it always wore me out. Thurston was a great distance runner. After 1 lap, I felt good. As I made the final turn and headed for the finish line, I was in the lead, but Thurston was at my heels. I held on and finished first. She crossed the line right behind me. I knew I was under 2:20. I could feel it. In fact, I had run 2:19.7, my lifetime best. The gold medal was mine. Not only had I won, I scored a total of 3,613 points and set a national age group record. I was elated and felt like jumping for joy. But I also felt bad that my teammate had finished second, with 3,404 points. I had the urge to apologize for winning, but I caught myself before I did. There was nothing to apologize for, I realized. It was all a part of competition. Sports Illustrated ran my picture along with a summary of my performance and the record in its Faces in the Crowd section. Then the East St. Louis paper, The Monitor, ran a story about the SI story. I tried to keep it all in perspective. I wasn't a female Bruce Jenner yet. I came back from Lawrence, Kansas the next year with my second Junior Olympic Pentathlon gold medal and another age group scoring record, 3,817 points. In Bozeman, Montana, the next year, 1979, I improved to 3,953 points. I won again at the 1980 Games in Porterville, California, with 4,129 total points. I also won the long jump in Santa Clara with a leap of 21 feet 3/4 of an inch. I have never felt I have a hard time even saying the word unfeminine while playing sports. Mr. Fennoy convinced there was nothing unfeminine about it. People will try to tell you otherwise, but playing sports won't change your sexual orientation, he said. We're trying to give you experiences that will broaden your horizons. You should use sports as a springboard. Through athletics, you can get a scholarship to college, which will propel you into a career and allow you to be whatever you want to be. He told us stories about famous female athletes, including Wilma Rudolph, a great lady and Olympian. Through his stories, I discovered that Wilma and I had so much in common. Like me, Wilma came from a poor background. She was one of 22 children. She had scarlet fever and polio as a child and couldn't walk for many years. When she was growing up, other kids made fun of her and didn't include her in activities because she wore braces on her legs. But she used sports as motivation. She was determined to walk, and eventually Wilma not only walked, she ran very fast. She won 3 gold medals at the 1960 Olympics in Rome. The day Miss Fennoy told me about Wilma, I went directly to the library and found a book about her. At home that night, I sat on my bed and read every word. Wilma became my role model that night and has been ever since. The community's reaction to our athletic activities confused and frustrated me. Initially, some parents told their daughters not to get involved in sports and allow the girls with athletic talent drop sports altogether in the face of such strong peer and parental pressure. But when our basketball and track team became successful, those same parents showed up at every competition and cheered their lungs out. I initially thought it meant we were proving that girls could run, jump, and sweat, then go home, shower, dress up, and be treated like the rest of the girls. But attitudes didn't change much. Unfortunately, people aren't much more enlightened today than they were when I was coming of age in the 1970s in East St. Louis. Despite the advances female athletes have made and the growing popularity of women's tennis, golf, basketball, softball, and soccer, the negative attitudes persist. It's true that there are gay women participating in sports, but I don't know whether they are more prevalent in athletics than they are in the other professions. I don't care. I would never criticize someone for the choices they made in their personal relationships. The most important thing to me is what's inside a person's heart. I believe that many of the people who continue to label all female athletes as lesbians and shy away from women's sports for that reason are not only intolerant and prejudiced, they're also enemies of women's athletics. The label and the scare tactics are a way to justify the narrow-minded opinions and keep female athletics from succeeding. It's really unfortunate so many girls I knew back home got pregnant before graduating. Others got married soon after graduating and became housewives, not other choices, but because they didn't consider the other options. Most of them never left East St. Louis. While I certainly don't look down on mothers or homemakers, I hope to be a mother and a homemaker myself someday. My point is that if those girls had developed other interests, they might have more options. But either because of fear, intimidation, complacency, they didn't. When the letter arrived telling me I qualified to compete for the spot on the Olympic long jump team and inviting me to the 1980 Olympic trials in Eugene, Oregon, I couldn't stop staring at it and rereading it. I couldn't get to sleep that night. I was so excited. I kept imagining myself on the medal stand. The Olympic trials were bigger than anything I ever experienced. After checking in at the bustling registration center, I received an identification tag and a big bag full of gear from Nike that included a pair of blue overalls with the word Nike across the bib, a jacket, lots of T-shirts, and blue track shoes with a yellow swoosh. At Lincoln, we wore one pair of spikes until they were wore out. The spare pair made me feel like Imelda Marcos. It was the first time I ever gotten free equipment. Because I've already graduated from high school, I could accept it without breaking any rules. but the grand prize was the blue and red sweatsuit with the letters USA on the back, awarded to the athletes who qualified for the team. I looked lonely at the big stack of them, folded and wrapped in clear plastic bags. Whatever confidence I had vanished the moment I set foot on the track the first day. I walked over to the long jump warm-up area, and there was Carl Lewis. He was a student at the University of Houston and a favorite in the men's division. I watched Carl warm up. His stride down the runway was breathtaking. His sister Carol, still in high school, was competing against me in the women's division. She and I had gone at it for years in the AAU long jump competition, trading first and second places. Another nemesis from the junior competition, Gwen Law, was also there. In high school, I was oblivious to my competitors. I just went out and jumped with confidence. But in Eugene, I was suddenly keenly aware of every potential threat. My nerves got the best of me when it was time to compete, which only added to my timing problems down the runway. I finished 8th overall, managing only a pitiful jump of 20 feet 4 inches. I was inconsolable. "It's a respectable performance," Mr. Fenoy said. "Build on it. Use it as a motivation for 1984. Brooks Johnson, the track coach at Stanford at the time, got into the elevator with me at the hotel after my event. He could see how blue I was. "You have a lot of potential," he said. "Even though you didn't succeed this time, just remember, the Lord works in mysterious ways." I also met a young track coach from California named Bob Kersee. I had read an article in Track and Field News about the program Bobby had built at Cal State Northridge. The monthly magazine is the Bible of the sport, and in high school I read it religiously. Bobby had just been hired by UCLA as an assistant track coach. I made a mental note of it, but otherwise I didn't think much about this fellow Bob Kersee. He didn't say much and seemed quiet. College recruiters sent me information and came to our track meets and basketball games through my last 2 years at Lincoln High. After suffering through all those bitter winters in East St. Louis, I was anxious to go someplace warm. I eliminated schools that wouldn't let me continue to play 2 sports. As I was on the basketball team as well as the track team, UCLA met my criteria in all categories and was always my first choice. I followed Coach Billy Moore since 1976. I was impressed that she coached the U.S. Women's Olympic basketball team and that UCLA won the Women's National Championship in 1978. I also knew she really wanted me on her team. Daddy scraped together money to pay for a recruiting visit to UCLA. He and I flew out there on Friday morning for a weekend stay. On first sight, Los Angeles was an eyeful. The mountains in the background were magnificent, but I looked at the packed freeways in wonder and horror of the ride to campus from the airport. I'd been itching to get out into the world, but now that it looked like such a big, busy place, I wasn't sure I was ready. We toured the campus with an athletic department official. When the tour was done, Daddy and I met briefly with the women's athletic director. Then Daddy bid me farewell for the weekend. "Here's my number in case you need to reach me," he said. "You're on your own. That's how it would be when you get to college. So I'm not going to hang around and watch over you." That trip was the best gift my father ever gave me. During that weekend on campus, I got a different, less threatening view of city life and freeway traffic from the passenger seat of Billy Moore's sports car. When we stopped for Fat Burgers, I felt like I was having an authentic Los Angeles experience. I met the other coaches and stayed in the dorm with Susie Swanson, a point guard. Getting to know her and the rest of the team made me more comfortable with the idea of living so far away from home. I knew I had lots of friends. By the end of the weekend, UCLA and Los Angeles didn't seem so daunting. I knew I could succeed and be happy there. As much as I appreciated the trip and his support, I didn't want or feel I needed Daddy advice anymore. But part of it was teenage rebelliousness and arrogance. But a bigger part of it was anger over the things I witnessed in our home. Daddy had changed. When he came home drunk, he was verbally abusive to my mother. Initially, their arguments only happened occasionally, But pretty soon, every conversation between my parents was a full-blown shouting match. My feelings for Daddy were never the same after he flew into a rage one night and knocked my trophies and medals off 2 display shelves in the living room. He tried to apologize, but to me, it was unforgivable. I started crying. I ran to the pile on the floor, looking at them shattered. I felt like he shattered something inside me as well. I gathered them up and ran into my room, not talking to him for weeks afterwards. My mother finally got fed up with his abuse and his drinking. She decided to move out and file for divorce the summer after I graduated from high school. She walked into the family room while my father wasn't home and said, "We're leaving." She called my Aunt Della then, without packing a single piece of clothing. She, Deborah, Angie, and I walked out the front door, climbed into Della's car, and drove away. I understood how my mother felt, but I hated what was happening. My whole world was crumbling before my eyes. As the UCLA basketball team bus drove onto Westwood campus and turned into the parking lot of the famous Poly Pavilion, the site of our home games and so many glorious moments in Bruins basketball history, I was feeling pretty glorious myself. I had just scored 19 points in our victory over Cal State Long Beach. I opened the door to my dorm room. It was dark. My roommate was out. I turned on the light and was greeted by a framed picture of my mother that sat on my desk. Seeing Mama's picture always transported me back home to 1433 Pickett Avenue and to our conversation on the sofa. She didn't know a layup from a free throw, but after every basketball game and track meet, she listened intently to my recap while my sisters made sandwiches in the kitchen or watched television. I hadn't seen Mama since that September morning when I bid her farewell at my Aunt Della's house. We were living there, and my parents were preparing to divorce. A few minutes before I was scheduled to leave for the St. Louis airport, she walked into the bedroom. "You all packed?" "Yep." "Ready to go," I said, beaming. "Good," she said. "Well, I guess it's time to say goodbye then." My smile vanished. "Aren't you going to the airport?" "No, I'm afraid that your father will show up at the airport and try to make a scene. I don't want to spoil everything for you by having a confrontation with AJ, so I'll just stay here." Tears welled up in my eyes. "But I want you to go with me and see me off," I said. "This is our big day, you know." I know, she said. She took my hand and led me to the side of the bed where we sat and embraced. "I've been dreaming about this day since you were born. I really want to be there, but I think it's for the best." I don't think it was. I hate the idea. Tears streaming down my cheeks as she continued to explain. She hugged me for a long time and said, "I'll be at the airport with you in spirit, just like I'll be with you at UCLA." As I wiped away my tears, I quietly said, "Okay." "I'm going to miss you a lot," she said, "but we'll still have our talks. I want you to call me every night. That way, it would seem like we're still together. I know you can take care of yourself out there. I love you, Jackie." Then she kissed me. Life for my mother in the months since that conversation hadn't been easy. My father was contesting their divorce after initially agreeing to it. Mama was supporting herself, Deborah, and Angie on her meager salary as a nurse's assistant. At the same time, she was always having to send money to Al, who was having financial problems at college. Just a few days before, she'd written to me complaining that Deborah made her angry by not doing her household chores and going out without permission. In the note, she apologized for not including any money. Al had phoned her, saying he needed money for books. She said she knew I understand, and I did. My first quarter at UCLA had been trying, too. My homesickness was almost unbearable. During one of our nightly calls in November, Mama asked me if I wanted to come home for Christmas. I put up a brave front. "No, we have practice the day after Christmas. I only get to spend a week at home, and I have to leave on Christmas Day to get back for practice. It doesn't seem worth it." There was a long silence. Then she asked, "Aren't you homesick?" Her voice cracked. "Don't you want to come home for Christmas?" I cried silently and had to clear my throat to keep my voice from cracking. After a pause, I said, "Oh, no, I'm not homesick. I can wait until June to come home." "Okay, if you're sure that's what you want to do, but if you change your mind, just let me know and I'll send you money for the plane ticket, or I'd love to have you home for the holidays." I would have loved to go home. I was heartsick about not being with my family. I wanted so badly to say, "Mama, I want to come home," but I knew what a strain it would be for her to come up with $700 for a ticket. That was just about a whole month's salary. At the instant, the digits on my alarm clock switched from 9:59 to 10. I picked up the telephone receiver. Finally, it was time to call home. I couldn't wait to tell Mama about the game against Long Beach State. "Hi, Jackie. Everything okay?" Her voice sounded nasally, as if she had a stuffy nose. "Yeah, we had a game tonight and I played really well. It was against Cal State Long Beach. You sound like you have a cold." "I don't feel too good. I think it's the flu. I have a really bad headache, and I'm running a temperature. I'm going to the doctor tomorrow. Do you mind if we talk tomorrow?" "No, that's fine. I can tell you about the game tomorrow." "I'm so tired. I just want to go to bed now," she said. "Okay, I hope you feel better. I love you." "I love you too. Bye." The phone rang early the next morning. It startled me and my roommate, who returned and was asleep in the twin bed across the room. The voice on the other end was my Aunt Della. She sounded upset and started sniffling when I answered. "Della, what's wrong?" "You need to come home right away. Mary's dead." The word hit me like a 2x4 across the face. I dropped down into the chair at my desk. My eyes went directly to my mother's picture. I couldn't believe my ears. My mother was just 37. She was healthy. She'd never been seriously ill. It can't be, Della. It just can't be. She can't be dead. I just talked to her a little while ago. "She had a bad fever and we had to rush her to the hospital," Della explained. "The doctors think she might have had meningitis, but they don't know for sure. It just happened so fast. She started internal bleeding." Della put my mother's best friend, Joyce, on the phone. Joyce was a head nurse in one of the surgical units at St. Mary's Hospital. Mama was a nurse's assistant in the same section on the 4th floor. I asked her how Mama died. She explained that Mama wasn't quite dead. "Huh, what?" "She was on life support," Joyce said. "Respirator." Joyce's voice was sad but calm. "We're going to get you home right away. Don't worry about the money. Just make a reservation and call me back with the flight information, and I'll pay for the ticket." The plane ride was pure torture. Endlessly, I berated myself for making the decision I had. I missed out on Christmas and forfeit the opportunity to be with my mother one last time, all because I had been too proud. I've never been so sad and so sorry about anything. The sun was setting as the plane touched down at Lambert Field, the St. Louis airport. It was about 5:30 in the afternoon when my Aunt Marcelle greeted me at the gate. As we drove to East St. Louis, I stared blankly out the window into the distance. The temperature outside was right around freezing when we stepped out of the car at the hospital parking lot. As we rushed through the sliding glass door and entered the hospital, my throat and eyes started burning as well. The despair was thick in the air as the elevator doors opened to the 4th floor. Most of the nurses and the orderlies who worked with my mother had gathered on the floor after their shift ended at 3 that afternoon to hold a vigil. Most of them looked just like I felt, grief-stricken and dazed. It was the same way in the crowded room at the end of the hallway where the rest of the family was waiting. As I walked in, I forced a smile to my lips. I couldn't keep it up for long. Della, Al, Deborah, and Angie ran to me. We hugged and cried. Daddy was there too. Reverend Owens was consoling us when Mama's doctor, Dr. Renee Julian, and Joyce came into the room. Joyce walked over to the couch and stood beside us. Her eyes were red, but she was completely composed. "What happened?" "When can I see Mama?" I said. "Your mother developed a real bad bacterial infection," Dr. Julian said. "We think it is meningitis, but we're not positive." Dr. Julian said she started running a very high fever as the bacteria infected her and quickly spread it throughout her body. She experienced a lot of bleeding internally and externally, and it had caused swelling all over her body. He told us she was on a respirator, which was keeping her body alive. She suffered irreversible brain damage, Dr. Julian said. Her body is still functioning, but essentially she's dead. "I'm really sorry. There is nothing we could do." Joyce looked at all of us. "When you go in to see her, you'll see that she has a pulse, but the machines she's connected to are the things keeping her body going. Mary can't do it for herself because her brain is dead." Joyce's words were like the irrevocable locking of the door. The Mary Joyner we all knew, my mother and my life's greatest inspiration, was gone. "Can we see her?" I asked. "Yes, but first I need to prepare you for what you're going to see when you go into the room," Joyce said. "Your mother doesn't look the way you remember her. The bleeding caused her skin to change and made her body swell. It also made her skin very fragile. You have to be careful if you touch her because in her condition, the skin ruptures easily. This is a horrible, horrible disease." Dr. Julian explained that her disease, whatever it was probably highly contagious. Anyone who came in contact with her had to wear protective clothing and had to take an antibiotic. Al and I went in together. The protective gear made us look like we were ready to assist in surgery. Though she tried, Joyce could never have prepared me for what I saw when I walked into my mother's room. My knees buckled. Joyce and Al caught me as I collapsed into a heap of tears and sobs. The person lying in the hospital bed looked nothing like the beautiful smiling woman in the picture on my desk. The disease had ravaged her. She looked as if she had gained 100 pounds. Her now swollen head was the size of a big honeydew melon. Her lovely face was stretched out of proportion, and the caramel-colored skin on her face, neck, and hands had turned as black as licorice. Her nose was packed with white gauze. Her eyes were shut. She looked as if she was in a deep, deep sleep. Looking at her lying there, I ached all over. She was so helpless. I wondered if she was in pain. I wanted so badly to do something to comfort her, but there was nothing I could do. She couldn't feel my kiss or hear me say I loved her. I couldn't even caress her because I was afraid I might tear her skin. It broke my heart. I couldn't imagine the agony my mother had been through from the time the paramedics wheeled her into the emergency room at 5 a.m. With the infection racing through her and her temperature soaring, the ER staff had wrapped her in a green plastic cooling blanket that looked like a sleeping bag. She was conscious and alert, but the internal bleeding had already begun. Within an hour, her eyes had a vacant, glassy look. She was losing consciousness. They moved her to the intensive care, but her condition rapidly worsened. Every doctor in the hospital came by the room to consult with Dr. Julian about a diagnosis and treatment. No one had ever encountered anything like it. The fever and the flu-like symptoms suggested meningitis, but the others didn't match. Until several days later, they did discover the cause of the death. Mama had contracted a deadly bacterial infection that led to a rare condition known as Waterhouse-Friderichs syndrome. In the ICU, hours before I would arrive, Mama's skin began to darken. Then shortly before 8 a.m., One of the monitors blurted out a loud, long beep. The nurses in the room screamed, "Cold blue." Mama was dying. Joyce and a half a dozen others rushed to the ICU, but it was too late. A technician wheeled in the EEG to check for the brain activity. The only mark on Mom's EEG was an unwavering straight horizontal line, indicating total brain death. The doctors immediately put her on the respirator. But over the next 12 hours, her condition never improved. The EEG readings were always the same, a long, flat line. Back in the family room, Al and I finally managed to compose ourselves. But Deborah and Angie continued to cry and cry. The question now was what to do. Joyce came over to the sofa where we were sitting and pulled up a chair. She said it was time to make a decision. Della was seated nearby and Reverend Owens stood next to her. He led us in a prayer for strength. Then he advised us to turn the respirator off. Through it all, Joyce remained stoic. Mary never suffered a day in her life, she said. By keeping her connected to the respirator, all you're doing is prolonging her agony and yours. Being hooked up to the machine is no way to live, and Mary wouldn't want it. But who would make the decision? Given the deterioration of his relationship with her, Daddy had no say in the matter. Della bowed out, saying the decision was up to the children. I didn't know what to do. Even though she was only alive because of the machine, I told myself, at least some part of Mom is still with us. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized she wasn't really living anymore. After a long, tense silence, I looked at Al, Deborah, and Angie. We all held hands. Tears started to well up in my eyes. My lips were quivering, and my voice racked. This is the hardest thing in the world to say. But I think we should take her off the machine, I said. I don't want to do it, but we have to do what's best for her. We'll never be able to talk to her again. We can't even touch her. Leaving her like this would be torture. If we disconnect it, and it's meant for her to breathe on her own and live, she will. If not, she'll go to heaven and find peace. Al agreed. That's what she'll want. Deborah and Angie nodded slowly. We embraced each other. One at a time, everyone went in to say goodbye to Mama. We were all in the family room when Joyce walked down the hall and into Mom's room to supervise the respirator shutdown. All of a sudden, a woman's anguished voice echoed down the hall, piercing the silence. It was the head ICU nurse whose job it was to turn off the respirator. She ran out of Mom's room wailing, "I can't do it. I just can't do it to my friend. They're not going to make me do it, Mary." When we heard her, we all started crying. Joyce stepped over to the respirator. She glanced upward. "Lord, this isn't what I planned for this lady. This must be your plan." Then she looked down at Mama. "Old friend, you know, I love you. This is the last thing I get to do for you." She flipped the switch to the off position. It was 10 p.m. Several minutes. The pulse monitor flattened. The doctor pronounced Mama dead at 10:30. My mother meant everything to me. She was my confidant. She was my teammate, my best friend, whose words would pump me up when I was deflated, whose shoulders I would cry on, and who on earth would listen so patiently while I yammer on and on about my athletic feats. She saw in me the possibility to have the things she had missed because she got pregnant as a teenager and had to drop out of school to raise her family. I always felt I was living not only my dreams for success, but hers as well. As I packed my bags to return to UCLA, I was a jumble of emotions. I was determined to be strong and self-reliant, but I wasn't. Though I had the love and support of Della, Marcel, Joyce, my brother and sisters, and although I carried Mom's spirit and energy around in my heart, I felt terribly insecure. I felt like a motherless child. My experiences in high school had made me gun-shy about relationships. It had been so emotionally draining. I decided that getting head over heels over some guy would distract me from what I wanted to do. So if I really liked a guy, I'd never let him know. Eventually, I let my guard down and started dating a guy named Tony Banks. He was a strapping 400-meter runner from San Diego. I met him through Andre Phillips, a 400-meter hurdler who went on to win the gold medal in that event at the 1988 Olympics. Tony and Andre were cool California boys, and they teased me about being a country girl. Tony and Andre came to my basketball games and said I was the first girl they ever seen who played like a guy. The three of us went out together a lot at first. Later, Tony and I started dating seriously. He seemed like a sweet guy at first. I moved into a dormitory next door to Reba Hall in my sophomore year, which put me closer to the other athletes. The following year, I moved into an apartment in Culver City with Tony and another female track athlete, LaShawn Ned. Things quickly turned rocky with Tony. Living with him night and day, I saw a different side of his personality. We were completely incompatible. He was selfish and possessive, while I was stubborn and independent. He was also insecure. Tony was UCLA's top quarter miler, yet the more successful I became, the more Tony resented me. He could deal with me as a girlfriend, but not as his athletic equal. Every time I've achieved something in basketball or track, he tried to make me feel like I shouldn't be proud of it. He belittled my accomplishment and criticized me in front of our friends. He didn't like the fact that I spent so much time at practice and ordered me to stop. I just laughed, which infuriated him. We argued a lot. Several times the argument turned into fights. Tony would hit me or shove me, and I'd punch him back. The first time he did it, I was startled, but I quickly retaliated. There was no way I was going to let a man hit me. I wasn't a battered woman or anything close to it. I didn't like where the relationship was headed. Andre brought up the subject of relationship during a track team trip and said Tony and I would probably get married. I would never marry Tony, I said. Al, who had continued to do well as a triple jumper in college, was thinking of coming to L.A. to train for the Olympics. I strongly encouraged him. I knew Bob Kersee, the UCLA assistant coach, could help him improve technically and would instill the discipline Al still lacked. I had an ulterior motive. I knew Al would be a buffer between me and Tony in the apartment. The three of us lived together from 1983 through the Olympics. I broke up with Tony and moved out right after the games were over. I didn't think I'd ever find someone in whom I could confide, the way I had with Mama. When I got back to school after her funeral, I got a message that Coach Kersee wanted to see me. The note puzzled me. As I walked across the campus to the track after my last class of the day, I wondered why he wanted to see me. He wasn't my track coach. He worked with sprinters and hurdlers. I was a multi-eventer and a long jumper. My first thought was, I must be in trouble. As soon as I entered the stadium, I heard a man shouting, "Let's go!" I looked across the field. It was Bobby, clipboard in one hand and a stopwatch in the other. I walked over to him, anticipating bad news or getting yelled at. Instead, his countenance softened when he saw me. In a low voice, he said, "I just wanted to tell you how sorry I was to hear about your mother passing." I was relieved and taken aback. "Thanks. I appreciate that. Have you decided what you're going to do about school?" he asked. "I'm not sure yet. I'll see how it goes." "Well, I know what you're going through. I lost my mom, too, when I was 14. So if you ever want to talk about anything..." "Oh, sorry to hear about your mom," I said. "Before you make any decisions about your future, please come and talk to me. Will you do that? Okay, thanks. How thoughtful. It opened my eyes. He wasn't my coach. He didn't have to concern himself with my problems, yet he did. That told me a lot about the kind of man Bob Kersee is. I showed up at the track after classes in the early afternoon, squinting from the glare of the relentless sun. All my multi-event coach would say, work on whatever you feel like. One day, as I walked off alone to the long jump pit, I looked across the track and saw that Bobby was already at work with his athletes. He had an agenda every day, and his athletes had to get to work right away. The more I watched Bobby, the more I wish I had a coach like him. He reminded me so much of Mr. Fenoy. He wanted his athletes to succeed and was willing to go out of his way to help them. The calendar said spring, but the temperature felt more like summer, and my motivation was as low as the mercury was high. I was competing sporadically in the long jump and heptathlon that first season, and the results weren't inspiring. My long jump performance was dismal. As a senior in high school, I'd been jumping 20 or 21 feet. Now, a year later, I couldn't even reach 19 feet. It was crushing. I always felt like the long jump was my bread and butter event, something I could do in my sleep and do well. And I loved the event so much, I always looked forward to it. To have this kind of trouble at this critical stage of my career shook my confidence. Things were just as bad with the heptathlon. I typically finished third, but I knew I should be winning. Among other things, I wasn't in shape because I hadn't been pushed to work hard in practice, the way I had been in high school. As I looked around the track that afternoon, I had a sinking feeling. After losing a heptathlon competition early in the season to Patsy Walker, who had been at UCLA but had transferred to the University of Houston, I asked my coach for help. He looked at me and said matter-of-factly, "It doesn't matter what you do. There's no way you're going to beat Patsy Walker." I was dumbstruck and livid. He hit a raw nerve. First of all, I couldn't believe a coach could tell his own athlete something like that. He wanted me to give up before I ever even tried to fight back, which was completely contrary to my approach to athletics. I took the attitude that no matter who I faced in competition, world's best or world's worst, I was going to go out and give it everything I had. Every time I competed, I put my heart and soul into it. I was prepared to work as hard as necessary to endure whatever it took to win. I wouldn't tolerate someone deciding that I couldn't measure up to another athlete. How did my coach know now I couldn't beat her with a little coaching help? "Because he doesn't have any faith in you," said a little voice in my head. The realization infuriated me. I was so upset. I marched straight back to my dorm room and called Mr. Fenoy. I was ready to transfer right then and there. When I told him what my coach had said and how I'd been treated, I just knew he'll sympathize with me and help me find another program. I know this is UCLA, and these are supposed to be the best coaches in the country, I told him. But I don't think they know what they're doing. They're ignoring me, I'm not doing anything here, and I'm not making any progress. After a brief silence, he said, "Jackie, I think you need to calm down and remember why you went to UCLA. You went there for an education." That was not what I wanted to hear. Now I was mad at Mr. Fenoy as well. "Yeah, but they don't have any faith in me." And I tried to make him see my point of view, but he wasn't interested. "I told you that athletics is a means to an end. You've been given a scholarship to attend a fine university. Your top priority should be excelling in the classroom. Whatever happens with athletics is secondary to that." I felt like I was hitting my head against a brick wall. No one understood how I felt, but I respected Mr. Fenoy so much. I told him I'd think about what he said. I decided to be patient and give it more time. For the rest of the season, I tried to think of track as secondary. But it was hard to swallow because that's not how I wanted to treat it. Competing and excelling at track and field was what I truly loved to do. I was considering making athletics my career, but even if I ultimately decided I couldn't make a living competing, I wanted to be the best I could be. I couldn't bear the thought of having the talent and not fully using it. That seemed like a sin to me. If God had given it to me, I should use it. As spring went on, I became more miserable. I didn't win a single long jump or heptathlon competition. My attitude was sour. No one tried to find out what was bothering me. There were days when my coach asked, "What do you feel like working on?" And I would say, "Nothing." His reaction, "Okay, see you tomorrow." I wasn't prepared for the competition or in shape. At the National Collegiate Championships, I finished third in the heptathlon, behind Patsy Walker and Nancy Kendrick. It was dreadful. It may sound strange to non-athletes, my complaint about only being the third best collegian in the country, but I knew I was better than third. The trouble was, I couldn't improve without help. By the end of the season, I could see that things were never going to get better. Accepting third place when I knew I was capable of winning was killing me. I'd rather not compete at all if I couldn't give it my best effort. The Tac Senior Nationals were the last event of the season. For most track athletes, the competition was held in Sacramento over the weekend, but the heptathlon competition was in Spokane, Washington early in the week, which meant I had to go to the heptathlon and then join the rest of the team on the weekend in Sacramento for the long jump competition. I assumed someone would go with me to Spokane since it was so far away, but my coach said he was traveling to Sacramento with the rest of the team. "You can meet us there when you've done in Spokane," he said. That was the final straw. They didn't care enough about me to accompany me to a major national meet. It was clear to me now that they didn't consider me, my development, or my competition important. I told Jeanette I wouldn't be on the team next year. As I pulled out my trunk in the dorm room and stuffed my belongings inside, I decided to give up track altogether. When I returned in the fall, I would play basketball and focus on my studies. But the thought of quitting broke my heart. A week before the Senior Nationals, Bobby walked over to me on the track and asked me about the meet. "Who's going with you?" he said. "No one," I answered. Bobby went into a tirade. "You mean to tell me your coach isn't going with you? That's outrageous," he said. I hadn't expected that reaction. If a UCLA athlete is competing anywhere for the school, one of the coaches should be there, Bobby said. "I'm going to the athletic director right now and telling her that since your coach has decided he isn't going, I'm going. And if she won't pay my way, I'll pay for it out of my own pocket. But I won't have you competing up there by yourself. It's unacceptable." He stormed off. I wanted to shout. At last, someone was in my corner. Bobby ended up paying his own way to Spokane. The experience changed my life. After the first day of competition at National, I was in fourth place and was starting to regain confidence. I've never been a great hurdler because my technique was ragged. Hurdlers should step smoothly over the obstacles, not jump over them, the way I did. I also didn't high jump well. I kept my head up, and my legs pulled up near my chest as I fell over the bar instead of laying back and allowing my body to flop over. But my shot put was okay, and I had run a good 200 meters. Bobby and I went back to the hotel. The long jump would be the first event of the second day of the competition. As I put my track shoes away in my hotel room and started to unwind, there was a knock at the door. It was Bobby. He was still wearing the same clothes he'd worn all day at the track. "Come out into the hall with me for a minute and bring your spikes and your tennis shoes," he said. I didn't know what he had in mind as I followed him out into the hallway. He walked all the way to the end of the hall, to the foyer near the elevators. "I want to work on your approach in the long jump, out here," he said, as he pointed up the hallway. "I want to see if we can make you more consistent on the runway." That was music to my ears. All season long, I lacked consistency. Confidence on the runway was the problem. The long jump is a three-step process. First, you need a strong run down the path. Then you need to hit the board, a strip of wood at the end of the runway, with your plant foot. It results in good trajectory in the air. Finally, you need proper form and good body control in the air. extending your legs and arms fully to stay in the air as long as possible. The key to a good run for me is rhythm. Runways vary in length, but they average about 160 feet long. After I pick the right starting point, I like to start off at a moderate speed and at about 29 feet away from the board. Accelerate as fast as I can while generating as much power as possible by bringing my knees up as I run. Then I want to plant my foot as close to the board as I can without going past it and falling. If any part of my foot is over the board when I take off, the jump is declared a foul and doesn't count. If I know I'm running the right speed, I can settle into a rhythm down the runway and concentrate on my launch and my form in the air. If I'm insecure coming down the runway, I start slowing down at the end to look for the board, and that spells disaster. That had been my problem all year. An article in Track and Field News about me at the end of the collegiate season had analyzed my jumping and the reason why I didn't win the long jump competition at the Collegiate National Championship. The writer said, if she ever finds the board, she'll win. Bobby put a strip of tape on one end of the hallway, then pulled out his metal measuring tape, extending it to 127 feet, and put another tape strip at that spot, placing my shoes on each side of it to mark where the 8-inch board would be. I put on my spikes and ran down the hallway just as fast as I would do during competition, while Bobby timed me with his stopwatch. Do it again, he said, after the first try. This time move up a foot. Eventually, we figured out that I needed to run 127 feet in 4.64 seconds or better, or about 19.4 miles an hour. That speed and that time would give me a jump of 23 feet, if I could hold myself in the air for 1 second. It was a good thing the hotel doors opened towards the inside. Otherwise, I could have gotten seriously hurt if a door opened in front of me and I was flying down the hallway. We kept our ears open to hear doors unlocking so that we could stop when someone came out of their rooms or got off the elevator. When they did, they shot a puzzled look at us. Several people heard footsteps and stuck their heads out of the doors to see what was going on. What was going on was the development of a drill that I would use for the rest of my career to train for the long jump. In practice, we work on getting the timing and the speed right. Then, just before the competition begins, I place a mark on the side of the runway, a track shoe, a piece of color tape, or a shiny metal stake, at the precise spot from which I want to start and another where I want to speed up. That way, I don't have to worry about hitting the board at the end, because I do it automatically. Bobby continues to time every run during competition and helps me adjust. Holding his thumb and index fingers apart and pointing either left or right, he signals how far forward or back I need to move at the start to jump further the next time. We worked 45 minutes in the hotel hallway that night. You'll do fine tomorrow, he assured me as we walked back down the hallway to my room after finishing. Just try not to think so much during the run and stop putting pressure on yourself. Okay, I said, smiling. Thanks for the help. You have to stop thinking that you have to be the best long jumper in the heptathlon, he said. Remember, it's just one of 7 events. You can't take it so personal. It's making you tighten up, and that's just adding to your problems. After just one day with me, Bobby had put his finger on both my technical and mental problems with the long jumps. No one had ever picked up on how I felt about the long jump, or considered whether those feelings might be hampering my performance. I'm not even sure I had realized it myself. But as soon as Bobby said it, I knew he was absolutely right. I felt so much more secure with him than I had with my assigned coach. He locked into my mindset. For the first time all season, someone from the coaching staff was on the same wavelength with me. Bobby also encouraged me, trying to boost my flagging confidence. You have a lot of talent, he said. My face lit up. You think so? I've never seen an athlete as gifted as you, Bobby said. You just have to be patient. I'm willing to work with you if you're willing to work with me. Sure, that would be great, I said. His words gave me new life. The one thing every athlete wants and needs is somebody who's as motivated and committed as she is. Someone who's willing to work as hard along with her. That was the wonderful thing about Mr. Fenoy. He recognized my talent and honed it. He could see how eager I was to improve and helped me to do it by pushing me in practice. That's why I was so successful in high school. I had come to UCLA hoping to have the same kind of relationship with my coach, but instead, Bobby was taking on the role Mr. Fennoy had played. Like me, Bobby was always striving to be the best. He was as excited as I was by the challenge of helping me improve. I walked into my hotel room that night feeling like I finally found a kindred spirit. I finished second at the Tac Senior Nationals in the heptathlon, my best performance all season. The 5,827 points I scored in the 7 events were the most points than any UCLA athlete had ever achieved in the event, and would have been high enough to beat Patsy Walker at the college championships that year. When he returned to UCLA, Bobby asked for and received permission to coach me full-time. Beginning in the fall of 1981, we spent a lot of time together. He was the first person I saw every morning and one of the last people I saw every night. During basketball season, I couldn't work out with the track team, but Bobby asked me to come out to the track at 6 a.m. to work on technique before my first class at 8. I'll bring him breakfast, and we'll work out. After basketball season was over, every day I finished classes and tutoring, picking up lunch for us and spend most of the afternoon at the track, then go back to my room or to study hall at night. Spending so much time with Bobby made me increasingly comfortable with him. Each evening after practice, he drove me from Westwood to my apartment in Culver City. During the 20-minute drive, I found myself talking to him about things I wouldn't dare tell other people, all sorts of thoughts and emotions, from the goals I had set for myself in track and field to my ups and downs with Tony. He opened up to me too, telling me about his girlfriend problems. He was dating a woman at the time who didn't think track was important and was jealous of the fact that he spent so much time with other women, namely Florence, Jeanette, Valerie, Alice, and me. He said she hated it when girls from the team came home with him to have dinner or watch videotapes of practice. He was constantly arguing with her about it. His problems were similar to mine with Tony, and the reasons were the same. Like me, his devotion to athletics superseded everything else in his life. Whenever he talked about ambition, he repeated the same line. A person shouldn't let personal setbacks destroy his dreams, he said. I agreed with him. Bobby said he knew I would become successful, but he hoped I wouldn't be spoiled by it. Your status is going to change, he said. Everyone will become your friend. You'll be showered with compliments. The key to remaining on top will be not letting any of the hoopla change you or your basic values. I told him he didn't have to worry about that. If I was lucky enough to find success, my attitude wouldn't change. The more time we spent together and talked about our professional and personal goals, the more it seemed that we were soulmates. Still, as far as I was concerned, the relationship was nothing more than coach-athlete. I considered Bobby compassionate and committed, but it was all business. It was the same kind of dedication and support Mr. Fennoy had given me in junior high and high school. If Bobby was sizing me up as a potential mate, he didn't send any overt signals. I thought of him as an authority figure, just as I had Mr. Fennoy. The fact that he was 8 years older than me also kept me from thinking of him as a potential boyfriend. He seemed too old for me. Even when we had those talks in the car or on the track, I called him Mr. Kersee and said yes, sir, when I answered him. It drove him crazy. He said it made him feel old. Even after my feelings started to change towards him, I wouldn't allow myself to think of him as a potential boyfriend while I was at UCLA. For one thing, I didn't know how he felt about me, and I wanted to protect myself from rejection. Also, I didn't want to damage our on-the-track relationship. The last thing I wanted was for him to feel uncomfortable about coaching me because I had feelings for him that he didn't share. I also didn't want to start a scandal or spark bad feelings among the team members by dating the coach. I knew it would cause trouble if the other athletes thought Bobby was favoring me because we were involved romantically. I also knew that relationship between coaches and athletes were considered unethical and that getting involved with Bobby could jeopardize his job. Therefore, I never brought up the subject with him or gave him the impression that I felt more for him than professional respect and admiration. By 1983, my junior year, I was focused on the upcoming Olympics. My leg muscles were rock hard thanks to Bobby's running drills. My overall health was only fair. For about a year, I endured chronic respiratory problems. I had one cold and bronchial infection after another. The condition flared up whenever I trained hard. First came the shortness of breath. A couple of times, my chest tightened up and I started wheezing as I strained to catch my breath. But after resting for a few minutes, the trouble subsided and I was fine. Bobby had to drive me to the Student Health Center several times when my chest tightened up and the breathing problems became serious. The doctors there told me it was bronchitis and walking pneumonia. Bobby said there was no such thing as walking pneumonia. He kept nagging me to see a specialist. These aren't ordinary colds, or pneumonia, or bronchitis attacks, Jackie, he said one day on the track, as I struggled to catch my breath. I don't care what the doctors at the Student Health say. You've got a serious respiratory problem. The same thing happened to Jeanette Bowden, and she's a severe asthmatic. You need to go to a specialist and have it checked out. I ignored him. I hated hospitals. Besides, I had other things to think about, like the 1984 Olympics. To get a taste of intense international competition, I competed in the 1983 World Championships in Helsinki, Finland. I was at a distinct advantage going in because there was no pressure on me. I was an unknown. Just go out there, learn as much as you can, and enjoy the competition, Bobby told me on the flight to Europe. He didn't want me to get wrapped up in the pressure and the mind games. Above all, don't be intimidated by the East Germans. They do their best to psych people out, and American athletes fall for that stuff all the time. Don't look at them like you're in awe of them. It was good advice. I wasn't thinking about these Germans. I was just doing my own thing, taking care of my own business. They say ignorance is bliss. For me, at those World Championships, it was. I was going up against the world record holder, Ramona Niebuhr of East Germany. But thanks to my own inexperience and Bobby's coaching, I was treating it just as another meet. In each of the first day events, I set personal records, which means I turned in my best performance ever. After 4 events, I was in 4th place and on pace to break the American record. Greg Foster, Florence Griffith, Jeanette Bowden, Valerie Briscoe-Hook made the trip along with Al, who was training with us. Back at the hotel after the competition, we were all ecstatic about the way things were going for me. The hotel served the most delicious ice cream, and we celebrated my success over bowls of vanilla ice cream. I could feel that something was wrong the following morning. My legs feel funny, I told Bobby at the track during warm-ups. I was lying on my back with my right leg extended straight in the air. He was standing in front of me, pushing the leg back towards my head to stretch out my hamstring muscle. "Look how flexible this leg is," he said, as he continued pushing the leg back against my resistance. "It's okay." I was still wary. No, something just feels strange. As the minutes passed, the leg continued to tighten, as if someone had wrapped the area between my knees and my hip with an ace bandage and then kept rewrapping it tighter and tighter. My leg just wouldn't relax, even after I warmed up and stretched some more. By the time I was ready to jump, the stiffness was bothering me. There was no pain, just tightness. It tightened to the point that I couldn't move it freely. Jogging was difficult, and I wasn't able to stretch it very much. I tried to forget about the leg and focus on just going full blast down the runway as I stood at the line for my first attempt. I ran down the runway as hard as I could, but before I got to the board, I felt a jolt of pain in the back of that same leg, excruciating pain. Bobby and Al ran towards me. They slipped their shoulders under my armpits and supported me as I limped over to the first aid tent. I was crying and moaning. "Oh, it hurts, it hurts." Through tears, Bobby kept saying, "I'm sorry. I didn't know. I didn't know." Aside from bad shin splints in high school, I'd never been seriously injured, so I had no idea what was wrong. A physical therapist came over and looked at my leg. He gingerly poked around the tender area and diagnosed it as a pulled hamstring. He introduced himself and said his name was Bob Forster. He started kneading the back of my leg to get the hamstring to relax and soften. It hurt each time he touched it. The pain from his poking and prodding was also as bad as the pain shooting up and down my leg. Afterwards, he said, it wasn't a serious pull, and that if I strengthened the muscle, I would be okay in a few months. Eventually, Bob became my full-time physical therapist and accompanied me to every competition. Unfortunately, we would replay that scene too many times in the years to come at major competitions. My withdrawal from the heptathlon marked the end of my first world championship. It was a sad ending, but it just taught us a valuable lesson about preparation. Just a few weeks before the Worlds, I competed in 6 events at the NC2A Championship to help the team rack up points and win the national championship for the 2nd straight year. Looking back on it, Bobby said my leg was probably fatigued from that as well as from the strain of the first day's competition. After my experience at the Worlds, he paced all of us better during the year. He didn't push any of his athletes too hard during the collegiate season, if it might jeopardize their chances of competing at the upcoming World Championship or Olympic Games. I took the 1983-1984 school year off to concentrate on the Olympics. My day began at 8 a.m. when I left my apartment in Culver City and hopped on the Venice Boulevard bus and took it to Sepulveda Boulevard, a long street running north and south along the 405 San Diego Freeway. From the bus stop on Sepulveda, I had to run 4 to 5 miles to UCLA campus in less than 30 minutes. For a while, it took 35 minutes. After a couple of weeks, I shaved it down to 32. The morning I ran it in 28 minutes, I felt like celebrating. It was a tough route. I dodged traffic, waited at stoplights, and inhaled exhaust fumes while I ran uphill and down. Getting the time down was significant. It was a signal to me that I would be stronger and faster in the 800 meters, the event that might determine whether I got a spot on the team. From 8 a.m. to 8 p.m., I worked 6 days a week. I sprinted up and down and around one half of the stadium, trying to climb every step before the hand on Bobby's stopwatch reached the 5-minute mark. Then I lifted weights, working each body part. In the afternoon, I worked on the heptathlon skills. I had never worked harder at athletic training. My palms were decorated with calluses from weightlifting as I limped off the darkening track at the end of each day. My calves ached, my buttocks were tight, and my feet screamed for pail of warm water. But I saw the rewards every time I looked in the mirror. My arms and legs were lean and strong. My body fat count was in the low single digits. My stomach was as stiff as a washboard. The results showed on Bobby's clipboard. I was throwing the javelin and putting the shot further. The seconds were disappearing from the 800 to 200 in the hurdle times. I was jumping further down the sand, and the high jump bar was moving up. There's always a carnival atmosphere at track and field events. Athletes in the multi-events suffer more than others because our competition goes on for such a long time. Just as you're about to start your approach to the high jump, the crowd starts to roar about something that's happening on the track. Or they start playing the music for an award ceremony, and that throw your concentration off when you're in the middle of crouching for the shot put. During the Olympic trials, however, the carnival takes place inside a pressure cooker. The media and the people involved in the event make it hard to stay calm and focused. Journalists love to play up the fact that the trials are an athlete's one and only shot every 4 years to make the Olympic team. Athletes got spooked by such talk and start thinking, oh my God, I gotta be ready. This is it. Some put too much pressure on themselves, overtrain, and get injured before the meet. Or their nerves just get the best of them. And then there's all the requests for interviews and photographs. Here you are trying to prepare for the biggest event in your life, and suddenly you're bombarded with attention. In 1984, I wasn't distracted by interview requests or photos for sponsor ads. As relaxed as I was about the competition, though, I was only cautiously optimistic about my chances of making the team. The 4 women who were favored were hungry. Jody Anderson, who had won the 1980 trials, but the American team's boycott of the Moscow game dashed her hope of winning a medal. Jane Frederick held most of the American heptathlon records, but had been plagued with injuries for most of her career during major international competitions. Patsy Walker hadn't competed in 1980 because of a broken bone in her foot. Cindy Griner was trying to emerge from the shadows of others. The first day of the competition, I won my heat of the 100-meter hurdles in 13:61, a personal record. But Jody ran 13:52 in the next heat. In the high jump, I started at 5 feet 4 inches, and along with a group of others, cleared it. Jane passed at the height, which didn't seem unreasonable considering she cleared 6 feet 2 inches just a month earlier. The boy went to 5 feet 6 inches. Several of us cleared it, but Jane was still passing. Finally, she set it at 5 feet 7 1/4 inch. But when she rose into the air, the boy toppled. Then she missed again. Suddenly, there was just one chance left for her. Several girls cleared the height, but Jane missed again on her 3rd try. She no-heighted, which means she wouldn't get any points for the event and couldn't possibly make the team. We were all stunned. Jane was devastated. She just sat on the mat, holding her forehand in her palm, looking dazed. I felt so bad for her. What can you say to someone in that situation? I walked over, gave her a hug, and patted her on the shoulder. The trials were over for her before they really began. She had high hopes of winning her first Olympic medal after decades of working towards the goal. Now she's falling short again. Jane was one of those athletes who always seemed to have trouble handling the pressure leading up to the trials. In 1980, she came in with a hamstring injury, which she blamed on overexertion. The high jump competition continued without Jane. I cleared 6 feet, another personal best, which gave me a 15-point lead over Jody Anderson, whose best jump was 5 feet 10 inches 1/4. Patsy Walker won the shot put. In the 200, Patsy ran a really good 24:68, but I ran it in a personal best of 23:77. We began the second day at the long jump pit. Patsy hit 20 feet 4 1/4 inch. I reached 22 4 1/4 inch. The judge, who sits at the end of the runway watching to see whether jumps or fall, hadn't given a signal. There was a pause. He stared at the line for what must have been an eternity. I kept my eyes on him while he kept his on the board. There was no instant replays in track and field in those days. Finally, he raised the white flag, indicating a fair jump. I threw my head back in the air and let out a big sigh. It was a new American heptathlon record for the long jump. Setting that long jump record meant a lot to me. I struggled so long to regain my form from high school, and here I was back on pace to break the American heptathlon record for the total points. Jane came over to me during the lunch break and encouraged me to go for the record. I really appreciated her support and told her so. It showed real sportsmanship for her to cheer me on when she was obviously hurting so badly. I realized, though, this wasn't a time to worry about records. The goal here was to make the team. I didn't want to strain so hard for the record that I might injure myself and wind up watching the Olympic heptathlon competition on television. I could worry about the record another time. After lunch, we walked to the Javelin area. The event, always a question mark for me, went unbelievably well. The first time I had tried to throw the implement in 1981, I hit myself in the head. I didn't win the competition at the trials, but I threw 148 feet 11 inches, another personal best. Things were clicking for me. I was in a cocoon of confidence and calm. I focused clearly on each event and on what I had to do. It's a state athletes refer to as the zone. I was still on pace to set a record, but most important for me, I was in first place heading to the 800 meters with a comfortable cushion. Patsy, Cindy, and Jody were in a dogfight for the other 2 spots, and the 800-meter race reflected it. Jody, running beside me on the outside, interfered with me as I tried to pass her. There were only 300 meters left, and she had lost the lead to Patsy, who was on the inside lane and had started her kick to the finish. I was ready to charge to the front with Patsy and tried to move closer to the inside, but Jody threw her elbow out in my direction and pushed me away. I had to run the rest of the race outside in lane 3. I was furious, but unlike now, the tactics wasn't considered grounds for disqualification. In the end, it didn't matter. Patsy won the 800, but I won the competition. I ran 2:13.41 on the outside lane, which gave me 6,520 points, a new U.S. record. Jody finished 107 points behind me in second. Cindy edged Patsy for the third team spot. I crossed the finish line filled with a wonderful sense of accomplishment. From despair that almost drove me out of the sport 3 years earlier, I rebounded to fulfill my great expectations. Several days later, I finished second in the long jump competition and earned a spot on the Olympic team in that event as well. Meanwhile, Al was having fun in the triple jump pit. He opened with 54.8 and took the lead. The crowd was stunned. No one expected Al to figure in the competition, but he was holding his own in the struggle with Mike Conley and Willie Banks, the 2 favorites. Banks jumped 56.2 3/4 of an inch. Then Conley went 56.10, and everyone's mouths dropped. Al would have to really give it all he had to stay with them. He walked to the line and showed a determination I've never seen before. He just flew on the jump, landing 56.4 3/4 of an inch down the pit, ensuring himself a spot on the team behind Mike and Willie. We embraced on the infield. I was so happy and proud. What a great day for the Joyners. We survived that grueling test of heart, tenacity, and nerve and emerged victorious. We were going to the Olympics together. It was a dream come true for the 2 kids who once raced each other to the mailbox on Pickett Avenue. Back at the apartment that night, Al and I phoned my father. He watched the whole thing on television, cheering us from his chair in the family room. The trip to Los Angeles for the Olympics was already on his itinerary. He said everyone in the neighborhood was sky high about what we'd done that day. Al and I smiled at each other. It was Sunday, June 17th. We wished Daddy a happy Father's Day. The trials were a triumph not only for Al and me, but also for Bobby. Besides my brother and me, he coached 5 other athletes who made the 1984 Olympic track and field team: Alice Brown, Jeanette Bolden, Florence Griffith, Valerie Briscoe, and Greg Foster. But there was no wild celebration afterwards. That wasn't Bobby's style. It's too early to celebrate, he said. We haven't done anything yet. The objective is to win gold medals. Immediately after the trials, Bobby packed the 7 of us and moved his training operation to the University of California at Santa Barbara, 2 hours north of Los Angeles. We spent the next 3 weeks there, preparing for the late July games with our friend Brooks Johnson, who as the head Olympic track team coach was holding tryouts for the various relay teams. I was all over the place, first on the track for a warm-up jog, followed by a quarter mile and sprint drills, then to the long jump pit or to the hurdles or in the throwing area with the shot and javelin. Brooks also saved a chunk of time to help me with the 800 meters. Brooks helped me unravel the mystery of the event. It's a race that's neither sprint nor distant, requiring physical strength, precise strategy, and mental discipline. My work with Brooks on the 800 began that summer and continued off and on for the next 4 years. We worked first on my endurance and speed. He put me through a series of sprints in rapid successions. First 300 meters, then 500 meters, then 500 meters again, and finally 300 meters. He timed each of them and insisted that I hit precise time targets. The last 300 had to be completed in 45 seconds, no faster, no slower. The point, he explained, was learning to divide the race into those 2 segments, 500 and 300, and to discipline yourself to hit those target times. The reason: running the race efficiently and successfully required proper pacing and careful strategy. Going out too fast too early or waiting too long to move to the lead would spell defeat. He took me for a walk around the track, pointing to target areas on the track and explaining our objectives. "Here's the point where you accelerate," he said, as we rounded the first turn. "A little further along," he said, "through here, you just sit back and look pretty." Into the second lap, he explained, "When you get here, you gather your strength and prepare for the final kick." Rounding the final turn, he smiled and said, "And here is where you punch it and come on home." Brooks had just given me the why and how of the 800 meters. Two weeks before the Olympics, the unthinkable happened. Bobby lined up all the women for sprint drills. I was running alongside Florence. I got out of the blocks well and started my charge, full blast down the straightaway. Suddenly, I felt a twinge creep up my left leg. Immediately, I knew what had happened. It was the same sensation I had a year earlier in Helsinki. As I slowed up, the pain increased. It was all too familiar. I pulled my hamstring again. Bobby and Bob Forster, my physical therapist, worked on my leg, massaging the muscle to get it to relax. After a few hours, it calmed down and the pain subsided, but it remained very tender. I couldn't put any weight on it. They wrapped it tight with an ace bandage and told me to stay off it for a week. It was 2 weeks before the 1984 Olympics. The first event of the heptathlon is the 100-meter hurdles. I walked to the starting blocks at the Los Angeles Coliseum with my left leg wrapped in a tight 12-inch bandage. I wasn't nervous, but I was apprehensive, afraid to go all out. After I cleared the first 2 hurdles with ease, I realized my leg was okay and tried to run faster. At the high jump pit, during the shot put and the 200, I had the same fear. I used my left leg to push off in the high jump, and I ran cautiously up to the bar. Maybe I thought I was giving it my all, but I wasn't. Prompted by the voice in my head, my first instinct was to protect myself and my leg. I was acting as if there was a tomorrow, but this was my one and only shot at a gold medal in 1984. There was no tomorrow. I threw the javelin 146 feet and pulled ahead of Glennis Nunn. Going into the 800, we were virtually tied. I had to stay within 2 seconds of her to win. Glennis was charging ahead. My face was a tight ball of anguish and strain. My legs were cramping, and I was spent. Glennis crossed 2.47 seconds ahead of me. I lost the gold medal by less than a half a second. 5 points. As I stood on the track several yards past the finish line, getting my breath back, the realization slowly sunk in. Bobby walked up to me, handed me a bottle of water, and gave me a hug. He asked me if I was okay and told me I'd done a good job, which I knew wasn't true. Al was the gold medalist in the men's triple jump. After the medal ceremony, we ran to each other and embraced on the field. I was in tears. "Don't cry, Jackie," he said. "You did great." "I'm not crying because I lost," I said. "I'm crying because you won." We looked around the gigantic Coliseum, packed with people. Not even my father's voice could carry far enough to prevail in that place. So if he uttered his familiar chants, we didn't hear him, but we knew wherever he was up there in the seats, he was overjoyed. We also knew that wherever she was up there, Mama was too. At home that summer, I spent a long time staring at my silver medal dangling on the end of that orange, green, and white ribbon and reflecting on my Olympic experience. My 5th place finish in the long jump didn't bother me because I performed well and was beaten by 4 better jumpers in the world. Pondering the heptathlon was much more upsetting. Although I tried hard, I knew my attitude had doomed my chances at the Olympics. Physically, I could have won the gold medal, but my defeatist attitude kept me from going after it in the javelin, the hurdles, and the long jump. After the 1984 Olympics, my feelings for Bobby were starting to change. After my 2 experiences with the opposite sex, my high school boyfriend and Tony, I felt like a real loser when it came to relationships. But I really did think he was cute, and when I looked at him, I saw a man possess the ideal qualities. I respect his judgment and his advice. He brought out the best in me as an athlete and as a person. I knew I could rely on him and confide in him about anything. I sensed that Bobby's feelings might be changing towards me too. One spring night in 1985, he picked me up in his car and drove to the beach. He asked me if I felt like he'd become more than a coach to me. This was what I had been waiting and hoping for. But I hesitated answering. Still guarded, I hedged and said something evasive like, "Yes, kind of." I told him I didn't know if that was off limits or not, because he was still my coach. I didn't know how to explain what I was feeling, I said. He looked at me and smiled. "That's okay. I have deeper feelings for you, too." We left it at that until the end of the spring term. In the meantime, we continued to work together and would go to movies alone and in groups. It was all very casual, though, nothing romantic. Bobby and I were so guarded and cagey about our feelings, it was a wonder we ever got together. But when we finally let down our guard with each other, it was like the Berlin Wall being demolished. The turning point came later that summer. We were in Houston before taking off for L.A. Bobby wanted to see a game at the Astrodome. It just so happened that the Dodgers were in town, and the night's pitching matchup was Fernando Valenzuela against Nolan Ryan. Bobby was in seventh heaven. Midway through the game, in between Nolan Ryan fastballs and bites of his hot dog, he announced that he had found someone to marry. My heart sank. He wanted to know what I thought about the idea. I forced a smile to hide my disappointment and said, "Oh, I think you'll make a good husband for someone." He laughed and looked at me with astonishment. "You don't understand, Jackie. I want to marry you." Bobby wasn't one to pour out his heart, so when he did open up, I knew he meant every word. Although he didn't romance me or conduct anything resembling a normal courtship, we've known each other for 4 years. We've seen each other at our best and at our worst. I knew I loved him. When he proposed to me in that awkward, roundabout way and told me he loved me, I knew he was serious about making a commitment. "Oh, okay, yeah," I said, the words stumbling out of my mouth just as awkwardly. "I'd like to marry you too." And so we were engaged. After one trip to the department store with Jeanette and seeing the paperwork involved in joining the bridal registry and the $900 plus price tags on the wedding gowns, I abandoned plans for a big wedding. Our ceremony was a simple, sweet affair at the church Bobby and I attended, St. Louis Baptist in Long Beach. January 11th, 1986 was a sun-drenched, picture postcard pretty Southern California day. I wore a white lace dress and a veil from my Easter hat. Al gave me away, then picked up his camera and served as a wedding photographer. Bobby's family and all of our friends from track and field and basketball attended. Al was the only member of my family who attended. I told my family back in East St. Louis not to worry about coming. It would have been an expensive trip. Instead of a honeymoon, Bobby and I flew to New Orleans, where I received the 1985 Honda Broderick Cup, which is awarded to the nation's top female athlete. It was one of my favorite wedding gifts. Bobby loves to tell people he's the boss at home, that if we are deadlocked over an issue, he has the tie-breaking vote. I always laugh when I hear that or read it in an article, because that's not the way it is at all. We each have equal input, 50-50, and that's the basis on which decisions are made, not 49-49, with Bobby holding the last 2% like some kind of trump card, the way he's always saying it. I know it makes him feel good to think that. If he wants to say it, he have to put it in his book, because that isn't how it is in my book or in our house. People have accused Bobby of sponging off my success to advance his career. The fact is, he was already gainfully employed as a coach at UCLA and was developing a group of potential world-class athletes when I got there. I joined his group. The other thing people don't know about Bobby is that he's never collected a coaching fee from any of the athletes who worked with him, no matter how long he coached them or how successful they become. Neither Al nor Florence nor anyone else has ever paid Bobby a dime for his coaching help. After the 1988 Olympic trials, Al, Florence, Bobby, and I flew to New York to appear on Good Morning America. After sitting on the couch in front of the camera and talking about how track was a family affair for us, Al and Florence headed back to Los Angeles, and we flew to Disney World. Bobby's last words to them were, "I'll call you about practice when we get back to L.A." The next day, we hopped into a cab outside our hotel to go to the Epcot Center. The cab driver recognized us from television. Then he started talking about how sorry he was to hear about what had happened. Families should stick together, you know. Bobby said, "I'm sorry. I don't know what you're talking about." The driver handed him the morning paper. The article said Florence and Al had announced that they were no longer going to be coached and managed by Bobby. They hired a new manager, and Al was taken over as Florence's coach. The news stunned everyone on the world-class track team. The media inaccurately depicted us as feuding in-laws. A profile of Florence published in Newsweek helped ignite the controversy. Quoting Florence, the article claimed Bobby tried to alienate me from Al, which was absolutely false. The article also contained a widely reprinted quote from Florence to the effect that Bobby ran the track club like a cult. 100 times I have been asked to respond to the quote, and 100 times I refused. People can hold whatever opinion they like about his coaching style, but the results Bobby has produced in international competition in terms of Olympic medals, world records, and world championships speak for themselves. It was September 1988 in Seoul, and the weather felt like Southern California in spring. The high in the 70s, low in the 60s. I was startled to see Sabina Pace, who got married and was now Sabina John, jogging around the warm-up track. She'd given everyone in the West the impression she retired. Sabina's presence upset me more than I realized. The first event in the hurdles, and she's a superb hurdler. Her 12:64 second performance in 1984 still stands as the heptathlon world record. I got out of the blocks well, but I hit a hurdle and stumbled. John was charging on my heels and had practically pushed even with me. I pulled away and registered 12:69. The high jump would be a real test. I had a slight case of tendonitis in my left knee, and it was killing me. I struggled to get my speed right on the approach, and then strained my ailing knee trying to clear a measly 6'1 1/4. I couldn't jump any higher. Luckily for me, none of my competitors jumped exceedingly well. Still, I was nearly 100 points off world record pace. The shot put requires a right-handed athlete to bend slightly and push off the left leg while tossing the metal ball. It's murder on a strained knee tendon. But I stared down the pain. I put the shot at 51 feet 10 inches. Okay, but not great. I ran the 200 meters in a so-so 22:56 seconds. By the end of the day, I was 181 points in front of John, but 103 points off world record pace. I set a new heptathlon long jump world record, 23 feet 10 1/4 inch, good for a whopping 1,264 points. For the javelin competition, I needed a strong left leg for pushing off, and mine was sore and achy. Without much of a leg to stand on, I fell into my old habit of arming the throw, not using my legs at all. The results, a disgusting 149 feet 10 inches. I shook my head after my last attempt. So, as usual, everything came down to the 800. I needed to run a 2:13.67 to break the record. I had so much energy, I felt I could have run it in 2:10. I knew I wanted a 62-second pace at the 400-meter mark halfway. That meant a very fast first lap and a lung-busting second one. I burst ahead at the start with all the power I could muster. Shubenkova of the Soviet Union overtook me and had a 62.63 second at the halfway point. I was right behind her at 63.60. My stomach started to burn. The three Germans passed me. I was falling off pace. A fresh surge of adrenaline shot through me. With 200 meters to go, I had caught them and even contemplated passing them. But I still had 200 long meters left. I decided to stay put. I was in 5th place. At the last run, I just pushed and pushed and pushed some more. I actually felt good sprinting to the line. I was content to finish 5th in the race because I knew I was first overall and first in the world. The clock read 2:08:51. I had my Olympic heptathlon gold medal and a new world record score of 7,291 points. Two days later, Ben Johnson shattered the world record in the men's 100-meter finals. 3 days after that, the International Olympic Committee announced that he failed his drug test and had to surrender his gold medal. In the span of 72 hours, track and field went from ecstasy to agony. Pandemonium reigned. All the reporting about performance stopped as journalists tried to figure out who would be caught next. Every question, it seemed, was about drugs and test results. The night before the long jump competition began, I was dragged into the muck. Joaquin Cruz, a gold medalist in the 800 meters in 1984, a silver medalist in 1988, told a television reporter that I looked like a gorilla and that Florence and I must be doing something that isn't normal to gain all those muscles. I don't care about the steroid allegation because I knew I was clean. But I really took offense at the gorilla comment. Besides being cruelly unflattering, it was racist. Reporters wanted a comment from us about the story. Cruz, shamed by my brother and father when they confronted him in the Olympic Village, denied he said those things. Later, my brother and father watched a tape of the interview in which he indeed uttered those words. They came storming into our room, incensed and talking about what we should do about the lies. Bobby told them to ignore the whole thing, at least until after the games were over. At the long jump, I was having trouble hitting the board. At the line before my second-to-last jump, I said out loud, "I'm not going to lose." Then I took off. It was a good leap. I sat down in the hole dug by my heels, a sign that I had grabbed every inch that I could get from the jump. The measuring tape extended 24 feet 3 1/4 inch. It was an Olympic record. The press conference afterwards was crowded and chaotic. Reporters and photographers and television cameras jockeyed for vantage points and seats. They all wanted to know what I thought of the comments made the night before. "I'm not using drugs, and I'm not on steroids," I said emphatically. Then I added something I've been wanting to say for a long time, but had kept to myself. Because of Cruz's comment on my looks, I thought it was the perfect time. I told them all that I read and heard all the disparaging remarks about my appearance. I never thought I was the prettiest person in the world, I told them, but I know that, inside, I'm beautiful. East St. Louis looked more depressed than I ever seen it on a cold, gray January afternoon in 1989 when I visited for a homecoming celebration. A dusting of snow covered the ground, but it couldn't hide the gloomy reality. I visited my hometown a dozen times or more during the year, so I knew the general condition of things, but the decay I noticed as we drove through my neighborhood disturbed me more than usual. The rust-colored smokestack of the manufacturing plant across the street from Porson Field still belched smoke, but the days of star-making were over for the track and stadium, now hidden and forgotten amid a forest of weeds. The Al and Jackie Joyner Park that was to have been developed by the city was deserted. Unused field with only a single slide and a set of swings. Across the street, the brick house that was to have been our gift from the city was unfinished and boarded up. Life itself seemed to be boarded up. There was no children running around carefree along the sidewalks or playing games in the street the way we had. The place had no laughter, no music, no joy. As our car approached the corner of Pickett and 15th Street, I looked at my childhood home. Some years earlier, lightning had struck there during a bad thunderstorm, and it caught fire. My father hadn't lived there since then. The house was nothing but a raggedy, empty shell now. The fragile roof looked as if the next breeze that blew through would cave it in. Bobby and I got out of the car and walked up on the rotting porch. I showed him where I used to jump from the railing to the makeshift sandpit. Standing in the yard, the memories flooded back. I could almost hear my mother's voice calling me in to help prepare supper. I glanced across the street at the Mary Brown Center. The front doors were held shut by a giant steel chain and an oversized padlock dangling on the end. The facility had closed while I was at UCLA after the funds that kept it operating was cut from the federal budget. It pained me to see the center like that. The closing symbolized the locking up of hope and the shuttering of ambition in my neighborhood, which I refused to accept. The year before, I established the Jackie Joyner Kersee Youth Center Foundation to provide enrichment programs for children in East St. Louis and to raise the funds to reopen the center. The 7-Up Company, one of my sponsors, had agreed to help, donating $700 to the foundation every time I long jumped 7 meters or accumulated 7,000 points in the heptathlon, and $7,000 for every world record. It was a heartbreaking sight, all of it. As I become more successful, some people even suggest that I should ignore my hometown. A reporter asked whether I was embarrassed to be from the city and whether I worried that it would tarnish my image. Even some people in the neighborhood couldn't understand why I so often came back. Such comments and questions upset me. "What do you mean?" I shot back. "East St. Louis is my home. I think by coming back, I give people their pride and hope. The city has a few problems, but it's a part of me." As Bobby and I drove up to Lincoln High, the sight of the school was an antidote to the sadness I felt about my neighborhood's decline. Instantly, I felt happy. I got out of the car and read the marquee on the school's front lawn. "Congratulations, Jackie Joyner Kersee, Seoul Olympics." I smiled, and I was home. The first thing I saw when I entered the gym, to the thunderous ovation, was a huge banner bearing the 7-Up logo that read, "Congratulations, Jackie, a dream come true." Several 7-Up executives had flown up from Dallas to participate in the school's celebration, which I thought was a wonderful demonstration of the company's commitment. Mr. Fenoy escorted me to the podium, where I looked out on a sea of cheering voices, toothy grins, and wide, bright eyes. About 40 girls wore T-shirts bearing the words, "Jackie Joyner Kersee, Dream Machine." Another 60 students stood along the back wall. There was so much to tell them about the facts of life. This was my chance to educate, encourage, and inspire. My parents taught us never to hate or to dwell on racism. For Al, Deborah, Angie, and me, people were either good or bad, not black or white. But as I got older, I learned the harsh reality. The fact is, for black people, life is more of a struggle because we must deal with racist attitudes on an almost daily basis. Young blacks are particularly challenged because of the lack of suitable role models. Standing there, gazing at these kids, I wanted to be a symbol of potential that exists inside everybody, to play for them the role that Catherine Dunham had played for me. I wanted them to see me as someone from East St. Louis who, against the odds, had applied herself and used her talents to succeed. They needed to know that although we all start out as raw material, great possibility lies within each of us. Someone also had to tell them to expect criticism whenever they grasp for more. Although others might discourage their ambitions, they have to know they wouldn't find a way out without determination and a clear focus. I wanted them to keep their eyes on the prize. With the message in mind, I stepped up to the podium. "I've been in your shoes. I know how difficult life is around here," I said. "Still, I'm proud to be from East St. Louis. I think about my raggedy old house. It represents what my family is all about and the struggles we went through to make our lives better. It's important to set goals and work hard, no matter how many people tell you it's useless or that you won't succeed. Without determination, your dreams of a better life won't come true. And I hope when you all are successful, you'll come back to the community and bring along a piece of your success to inspire others, because that's the only way life in our hometown would get better. I knew, however, that I needed to do more than just dispense platitudes. When Macy's invited me to ride a float in its Thanksgiving Day parade, I got an idea. With help from 7-Up and some other corporate donors, I shared the experience with a group of kids from East St. Louis who might otherwise never get to ride a plane or visit New York City and see the parade in person. I chartered a plane to fly them from St. Louis to New York. The group numbered over 100 students, including the entire 6th grade from John Robinson Elementary, the honor roll members from Hughes Quinn Junior High, the honor students and history club members from Lincoln High, and members of the citywide Girls Club. At lunch the day before the parade, we all sat around eating sandwiches and talking about whatever was on our minds. The night before the parade, I hosted a party for the girls and boys. It was chilly the morning of the parade, but seeing the kids' happy, excited faces when I passed them along the parade route gave me a warm feeling. I run into some of these people from time to time, and they tell me that the trip was one of the most memorable experiences of their lives. Unfortunately, political and bureaucratic obstacles forced me to give up the dream of reopening the community center. But in July of 1996, my foundation announced plans to build a new youth center at Kenneth Hall Park, only 10 blocks from where I grew up. We've already collected several $million pledges. We've also received support from the Monsanto Company. It won't be easy. We must raise $10 million for the first phase of construction, but I'm excited by the challenge. Meanwhile, there are bright spots to sustain, those who call East St. Louis home. The city built a big, beautiful brick stadium to replace Poison Field and named it after Clyde Jordan, the powerful township supervisor, school board president, and newspaper owner. A few years ago, the annual citywide track meet was moved to the new facility and renamed the Jackie Joyner Kersee Relays. It's a high honor for me, and another opportunity to remain connected to the city kids. Each year, I find myself looking forward to attending the competition. Every year, I spend several days working out with the Lincoln High girls track team at the stadium, indoors at the school during the winter. In 1991, Gail Devers joined our workout session. After our running drills in the hallways, we led the squad into a classroom for a discussion and asked them to tell us about their goals. The team wasn't as successful as it had been when I attended the school, and I wanted to help Mr. Fenoy figure out why. In response to my questions, the kids offered mostly canned responses. They wanted to be doctors, lawyers, etc. Immediately, I was suspicious. No one had said anything about winning a championship, which was always the first thing out of my mouth in high school when someone asked me that question. You guys are just saying stuff you think we want to hear. But you don't fool me, I told them. Jot down on a piece of paper what's bothering you, because I can tell something's wrong. Reading some of the notes broke my heart. There was a lot of dissension on the squad. Several members were angry that others put their boyfriend ahead of the team's goals. Some came from families with drug problems and had no one to talk to. A lot of the girls had similar problems, but each felt isolated. I started a discussion about it that brought them all closer together, and that year, the team won the state championship. I was pleased about that. I like to think that my encouragement had played some small part in it. But helping those girls win a trophy wasn't my ultimate goal. I was more concerned with helping them get their lives together. I was so affected by the experience, I decided to include an open forum for the girls during the annual relay activities. Each year we gathered 600 to 700 female participants in the meet and encouraged them to ask questions and discuss problems with me and the other elite athletes who joined me on the weekend. I hope we're making a difference. We always arrive in Europe at least 2 weeks before a meet to give our bodies time to experience jet lag and recover from it. In the midst of packing and traveling to Barcelona for 1992 games, I contracted a cold, then an asthma attack hit. Both Bobby and my inhaler were nearby, and I was able to quickly get it under control. After a visit to the hospital, the doctor prescribed an antibiotic for the cold, which we scrambled to find. I never trailed in the heptathlon. However, Irina Belova of the unified team of athletes from the former Soviet Union kept things interesting until the end. She needed to run 20 seconds faster than me in the 800 to overtake me, but I stayed within 7 seconds of her and won by 199 points with a total of 7,044. Bobby greeted me with a dozen roses and hugged me twice, all before I could sufficiently catch my breath. I was also allergic to flowers. I had to walk away from him. The NBC cameras caught him looking hurt and sounding jilted. I didn't mean to reject him, but I was about to choke. It was a muggy night. I just run the 800 meters. I was exhausted and out of breath. One thing about our relationship is that we're always ourselves, even when the eyes of the world are watching. Whether Bobby's screaming at me to come here right now, when I'm in the middle of an interview, or I'm telling him to stop kissing me because he's suffocating me, it's always candid camera. With us, what you see is the way it is. I stood on the medal stand wearing a strand of pearls and a brand new gold medal. I held my flowers close to my chest, but away from the allergy alarm bells inside my nose. I was both gratified and relieved. What a 4 years it had been. No matter what anyone else thought, I was very proud of myself. At the end of the contest, during a walking victory lap, I saw Tracy Austin and ran over to hug her. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Bruce Jenner trying to get my attention. When I walked to him, he told the crowd of journalists, friends, and fans near him that I was the greatest multi-event athlete ever, man or woman. I beamed. Here was the very athlete whose performance in the 1976 Games had inspired my Olympic aspiration, a decathlete who himself had held the title of the world's greatest, anointing me. Such compliments from a superstar male athlete to a female counterpart are rarely bestowed. It said a lot about what a generous person Bruce is. It meant more to me than any magazine ranking. I was momentarily transported from the mountaintop high in the Barcelona sky onto Cloud 9. Wilma Rudolph and I had met at the Women's Sports Foundation Awards dinner in New York. She was no longer just a role model. She was one of my closest friends and like a second mother. One day in 1993, I sat on the sofa and unloaded all the frustration and sadness that had been building inside me since 1988, the same way I used to do with Mama. I don't know, Wilma. I just feel sometimes that winning isn't enough for people anymore when it comes to me, I said. If I don't break a world record, it's a disappointment. If I don't score over 7,000 points, it's only okay. She smiled sympathetically. That's what happens when you're on top, she said. People are gunning for you. You can't let it get to you, though. You have to turn a blind eye and a deaf ear to it. I'm doing the best I can. Why do they have to be so harsh? I asked. Forget about trying to please them, Wilma said. Remember why you're doing this. You have to want this for yourself. I've always enjoyed our talks so much. Wilma was so wise. I wish we had more years together. Sadly, she died of brain cancer a year later. That advice, so obvious in a way, yet so meaningful, coming from Wilma, was her priceless final gift to me. She'd given me the new perspective I was seeking, a way to cope with the pressures of expectation. She also reminded me of something very important that I'd forgotten. I'd become so wrapped up in earning everyone's respect and approval, I lost sight of the reason I started jumping and running in the first place, because it satisfied something within me. For many athletes, the word farewell might as well be a four-letter word. They see it as the end of their glory days, of their turn in the spotlight, of their very lives. I don't have that attitude. I've always known that my time on the top would end someday, that someone would come along and eclipse me. I wanted to prepare myself for it, and to the extent I could control it, start walking away before being pushed aside. The moment I decided the 1996 Games would be my last Olympics, I started planning the next phase of my life. After the Games ended, aside from selected long jump competitions and personal appearances on behalf of my sponsors, my calendar would be virtually empty for the first time since I was 10. The bulk of my time would be spent on something other than running, jumping, and competing. Suddenly, a world of opportunities was available to me. I wanted to dive into the unfinished work at my foundation, including raising the remaining $6 million to start the first phase of construction on the youth center in East St. Louis. I was also eager to focus more on my personal life. Since our wedding day, I've been buying baby clothes and stashing them away inside a drawer until Bobby and I started a family. Biologically speaking, it's time. In March of 1997, I turned 35. I'm ready emotionally, too. Bobby has been talking about having kids for years, but I wanted to wait until I could give our children my undivided attention. I know how single-minded I am when I'm training. To raise a child in those circumstances would have been unfair and irresponsible. When I walked onto the field the night of the 1996 Olympic long jump finals, a thunderous ovation began. I studied the arena for the first time. It was vast, with 3 tiers of seats. Beneath the darkening sky, thousands of camera flashes illuminated the stadium like so many twinkling stars. The crowd of 80,000 was standing and cheering for me now. I couldn't stop smiling as I looked and listened. It gave me goosebumps. The affection from the crowd flowed into my pores and turned to pure energy. I wanted to get out there and give it my all because I knew they were on my side. It was the most invigorating experience I ever had on the athletic field. I loosened up on the runway after putting on my spikes. After locating the spot I wanted to start from on the runway, I nailed my marker into the ground next to it. The painful throbbing in my leg matched, beat for beat, the pleasant pounding in my chest. I sat down and banged on the bandage with my hammer, trying to beat the spasm into submission and loosening up the tightening muscle. I dipped 2 fingers into a jar of icy hot and tried to slide some of the ointment under the bandage to keep the leg warm. I got up. I walked around. I shook the leg, blocking out the feeling of desperation creeping up on me. The first jump was terrible. After the 3rd jump, I was in 6th place at 22 feet 6 1/4 inches. 3 tries left. The 4th jump felt pretty good, and I was hopeful, until I saw the line judge raise the red flag, signaling a foul. I don't know what happened on the 5th jump. I walked over to the fence to get some guidance from Bobby before the last jump. He was way up in the stands, and he had to walk down to a tiny railing that was still a long way from me. We had to shout to hear each other. "Is it too fast?" I asked. "Yeah, slow it down. Build in the middle and accelerate at the end," he said. He turned and climbed the long flight back to his seat. I was struck by how calm he was, not a trace of excitement or panic. And I was sitting near the railing where Bobby spoke to me. He held his breath each time I stood on the runway, terrified that my leg would blow up at any minute. Miss Fenor sat in one of the 4 far corners, in what would be the end zone in a football stadium. He'd been clocking my runs with a stopwatch to monitor my timing down the runway, but he put it away to watch the final attempt. As I walked towards my marker, I was oblivious to the crowd's gathering roar, the flash bulbs going off all around me, the camera lens pointing in my direction, thousands of live eyeballs, and the countless millions of others staring at me through the TV screens. All I heard was the conversation I was having with myself. "Well, Jackie, this is your last jump in the Olympics, the ultimate test of everything you believe athletics is all about. You have to bear down and focus on execution. The pain is going to come, but you have to block it out and persevere. Here's where you show them your character and your heart. I tap my right foot behind me and whisper, "Come on, Jackie." I gather my hands. I put my legs in motion to run. I was running down the runway, bringing my knees up. As I prepared for the last 4 strides, I told myself, if this leg pulls, then it just pulls. I attacked those last 4 steps, planted my right foot, and launched. I tried to hold myself in the air as long as I could. For the first time in my career, when I landed in the pit, I didn't know if the jump was good enough. The judge at the foul line raised a white flag, signaling it was fair. Then an electronic scoreboard flashed 22:11 3/4. I had leaped into 3rd place and a spot on the medal stand. When the final results were posted on the scoreboard, the crowd went nuts. I was so overcome with emotion. I wanted to personally thank each person in the stadium. I was so grateful for their support. I went over to Al and hugged him. He was elated, simultaneously laughing and crying. Then, as we left the track, the line of athletes swung past Mr. Fenoy's section, and I ran to his open arms and hugged him. I looked at him just the way I had after finishing near the back in my first race as an 11-year-old and said the same thing I had that day. I tried. He clutched my head in his hands, pressed my forehead to his, and said, "As far as I'm concerned, that was a gold medal performance." I felt the same sentiment from the cheering fans as I walked around the stadium. They would treat me like a record breaker and a world beater, even though I was neither, simply because they knew I had tried. So many times in my career, I had been made to feel that because I didn't win and didn't win big, nothing I did mattered. But this time, every inch of it mattered. This time, 3rd best was just fine. Those ovations that night in Atlanta fulfilled and satisfied me more than any others I ever had. I left the stadium waving to the crowd, with tears streaming down my cheeks. Bobby was waiting at the edge of the track as always. We hugged for a long time. "That was the most courageous thing you ever done," he said. "I know you were in pain, but you didn't give up. This is a medal to be proud of." I was proud. As the bronze medalist, I led the procession to the award stand. When the medal was placed around my neck, I felt I received the highest honor of the competition. While the national anthem of Nigeria played in honor of the gold medalist, I realized that the essential lesson of athletics has also been the essential lesson of my life. The strength for the 6 jump came from my assorted heartbreaks over the years, the loss of my mother, the disappointing performances, the unfounded accusation, the slights, the insults, and the injuries. I collected all my pains and turned them into one mighty performance. And I had, indeed, been uplifted by the results. I showed the world that the little girl from East St. Louis had made something of herself. She was a woman, an athlete, with character, heart, and courage. I shall forever cherish my beautiful bronze medal from the 1996 Games. It is my reward for having learned the essential lesson and passing the tough test. It had been a most joyous Olympic experience after all. Dear Mama, as I sifted through my memories and organized my thoughts for this book, you've been constantly on my mind. You were so important to me when I was growing up, and your influence on me continues in ways I'm not sure I can fully express. It seems that everything I've ever done somehow relates back to you, to something you once said or did. I felt your spirit with me both during happy and sad times. On graduation day at UCLA, I heard you applauding as I received my history degree. You were somewhere in that crowd on the streets of East St. Louis during Al's and my victory parade. I bet you cried at the sight of Al escorting me to the altar to exchange wedding vows with Bobby. And yours was the voice I heard as I walked to the line that final time in Atlanta, telling me to have faith in myself. So many times I tried to imagine what you would say about the things I've done, the life I'm leading, and the person I've become. Since you aren't here to tell me, I decided to write this letter and share some of my thoughts with you. I know sometimes I mutter at you under my breath. and resented your rules. But I am so grateful now for the way you raised me. Without the discipline you taught, the strength you modeled, and the sense of hope you instill, I wouldn't be where I am, not even within shouting distance. When I was just a little girl, you planted the seed that even though I was black and a woman from a family for which nothing comes easy, I could achieve great things in this world. The key to success, you said, was to set goals, to keep them in focus, and not to be deterred by hardship or distracted by temptation. I realize now that I owe a big part of my success in the heptathlon to you. It's a lot like life, that event. It's a 7-piece puzzle that must be put together, even on days when the pieces aren't falling neatly into place. You, Mama, gave me the 3 most important tools I needed to contest that event successfully: fierce determination, an appreciation of hard work, and unwavering faith. On the personal side, I've been very fortunate to have Bobby in my life. I think you'll like him. He's a good Christian man. We have a very nice, very comfortable life together. But it's not money or cars or houses that I care about. It's the love that Bobby shows and the support he's given regardless of where I place in the standings, whether I'm the world record holder or I'm the 6th place finisher at the World Championship, or even just Jackie the Joker, a girl from East St. Louis. He is my security, always looking out for my best interests and protecting me, at times even from myself. I feel blessed to have him as my husband. All in all, I'm happy with who I am and with what I've accomplished. I like to think I'm successful. My biggest fear is that I haven't lived up to your expectation. The one thing I never wanted to do was let you down. That's why whenever I feel lost or perplexed about something, I try to think of what you wanted me to do. Some people who judge me as a person and as an athlete have made me feel like I wasn't pretty enough or that I wasn't good enough. Each time I thought, am I good enough for Mama? God, how I've tried to make you proud of me. I hope that every time you look down on me from heaven, that no matter how I look on the outside, you'll always see beauty within me. If you do, Mama, then I'm a success. Thank you for everything. I miss you. Love, Jackie.
This has been a Time Warner Audiobooks presentation of A Kind of Grace, the autobiography of the world's greatest female athlete. Written by Jackie Joyner Kersee with Sonia Steptoe. Read by Jackie Joyner Kersee. Executive producer, Maya Thomas. Produced and directed by Rick Spencer. Text abridged by Kim Grunenfelder and edited by John Whitman. Production coordinated by Daniel Metcalf. Recorded by Barry Lee. Tape edited, mixed, and mastered by Steve Petrofessa. A Kind of Grace is also available as a Warner hardcover book.